Hello guys, welcome to Potter Vibes. Today we have an incredible story for you. What if young Bellatrix Black met Harry at age 7 before Azkaban and her magic chose him over everything dark? If you enjoy the video, please like and subscribe. Let's get into it. Chapter 1, The summer the magic went sideways. The cupboard under the stairs at number 4, Privet Drive was exactly 37 inches wide and 62 inches long. Harry knew this because he'd measured it once with a piece of string he'd found in Dudley's discarded toy box, and because knowing the exact dimensions of the space where you slept made it feel less like a cage and more like a fact. Facts were manageable. Facts didn't care whether you cried about them or not. He was 7 years old, and it was August, and the heat inside the cupboard was the specific, airless kind that made the back of your neck feel like someone had pressed a warm flannel against it and forgotten to take it off. Outside, Dudley was running through the sprinkler in the garden with his friend Piers Polkiss, shrieking with the particular joy of a boy who had never once in his life been told he couldn't do something. Harry could hear them through the thin wall. He'd stopped listening to the sound of Dudley's happiness the same way you eventually stopped listening to a tap that dripped. It became background noise, neutral and meaningless. What Harry was doing instead was thinking about the spider. There was a spider in the upper corner of his cupboard, had been there for 3 days, and Harry had been feeding it crumbs from his meals and watching it build its web with what he privately considered extraordinary architectural ambition given the cramped canvas available. He'd named it Gerald. Gerald was, by any reasonable measure, the most competent individual currently living at number 4, Privet Drive. "You've got the right idea," Harry told Gerald quietly. "Build something. Make the space work." Gerald did not respond, being a spider, but he did twitch one leg in a way that Harry chose to interpret as agreement. The fight with Uncle Vernon had happened this morning. It hadn't been a large fight as their fights went, no shouting, which was almost worse, just Vernon's face going through its usual alarming color progression from pink to red to the particular shade of purple that meant Harry had done something wrong simply by existing in a visible way. What Harry had done specifically was accidentally cause every plant on Aunt Petunia's prized windowsill to bloom simultaneously, violently, and in colors that she later described to the neighbor Mrs. Fig as deeply unnatural. 3 geraniums, 1 orchid, and a fern that had been clinically dead for 6 months had exploded into flower at 7 in the morning because Harry had been standing next to them while reading one of Dudley's discarded picture books, a book about gardens, which Dudley had received as a gift and ignored, because Dudley ignored everything that couldn't be sat on, broken, or eaten, and he'd felt something warm and humming move up through the soles of his feet and out through his hands and into the soil of the pots. He hadn't meant to. He never meant to. The magic, and he thought of it as magic privately, in the same careful internal whisper he used for all his most important thoughts, the thoughts he kept where Vernon couldn't reach them, had been getting stronger lately. More insistent. It used to only happen when he was frightened or very angry, little sparks of something that made lights flicker or sent objects skittering across floors. But lately it came when he was calm too, when he was reading or thinking or looking at something he found beautiful, and it arrived with the feeling of something stretching after a long sleep, something vast and warm turning over in the deep dark underneath him, not threatening but enormous, the way the sea feels enormous when you stand at its edge and understand for the first time that it doesn't end. He'd told nobody. Obviously. The heat in the cupboard thickened. Harry shifted onto his back and stared at the low boards above him and felt the magic do that thing it sometimes did, that low hum in his sternum like a tuning fork struck against the inside of his ribs. Gerald dropped half an inch on his thread and then climbed back up. "Something's going to happen," Harry told the spider. "I can feel it." "Can't you feel it?" Gerald spun silk. The humming got louder. Later, Harry would not be able to say exactly when it started or what triggered it, whether it was the heat or the loneliness or the specific quality of the afternoon light that came in thin and golden under the cupboard door and lay across the floor in a single bright line. What he would remember was that the humming became a sound, a real sound, not just felt but heard, like a single sustained note from an instrument he didn't have a name for, and then the cupboard got very bright and very warm in a different way than the August heat, a way that was interior and electric rather than external and suffocating, and the floor seemed to drop, not fall. Drop, The way a lift drops when it begins to descend, that half-second of weightlessness that lives in your stomach. Harry grabbed for the edge of his thin mattress. The bright line under the door went dark. And then there was no door. There was no cupboard. There was a hallway. It was the strangest hallway Harry had ever seen, which was saying something because he'd seen the hallways of Little Whinging Primary School, which had water damage on the ceiling shaped like a map of a country he didn't recognize. This hallway was tall, taller than seemed architecturally reasonable, with dark wood paneling that went all the way up and a carpet runner the color of dried blood that stretched in both directions as far as he could see. There were portraits on the walls. Not photographs, not prints, portraits, oil paintings in heavy frames, of people in old-fashioned clothes who seemed, when Harry wasn't looking directly at them, to be moving. He stood very still. The magic was alive in him the way it never usually was, not humming now but singing, a full-throated harmonic chord that felt like standing in the center of a bell while it rang, and yet he wasn't frightened. He understood, in some wordless and immediate way, that he was supposed to be here. That something had brought him here on purpose, though whether the purpose belonged to his magic or to something larger, he couldn't have said. The carpet was soft under his bare feet. He hadn't been wearing shoes in the cupboard. From somewhere further down the hall, to his left, where the carpet runner bent around a corner, came a sound. Not the portraits, who made sounds like old papers shifting, rustling and dry. This was a human sound. Specifically, it was the sound of someone saying a word in a tone of intense, focused concentration, followed by a sharp crack, followed by silence, followed by what sounded very much like a quiet, satisfied ha. Harry went left. He rounded the corner and stopped. The girl was sitting cross-legged on the floor in the middle of the hallway with what appeared to be every candlestick holder from a nearby side table arranged in a circle around her. She was 7 or thereabouts, Harry's age, or close to it, with dark hair that fell past her shoulders in thick curls that were somewhat wild and thoroughly unbothered, and she was wearing what Harry would later come to understand were clothes that wealthy people wore when they weren't going anywhere important, a dark blue dress, practical enough, slightly ink-stained at the left sleeve. She was holding a short stick, maybe 10 inches, pale wood, and she was pointing it at the candlestick in front of her with an expression of the most absolute, undiluted concentration Harry had ever seen on a human face. The candlestick rose 6 inches off the floor. Without a word, without a sound, it simply lifted, wobbled once, steadied, and hung there while the girl's dark eyes tracked it with the focused intensity of a hawk watching something in tall grass. Her jaw was set. Her free hand was pressed flat against the carpet. Something in the air around her had a quality Harry recognized, that same warm, charged texture that he felt in himself when his magic was active, but hers was different, darker toned, more deliberate, the way a controlled fire is different from a wild one even though both are burning. Harry had never in his life seen someone else do magic. He stood there and felt something click inside his chest. Not a metaphorical click. A physical sensation, small and clean and decisive, like a key turning in a lock he hadn't known was there. The girl heard it too. Her concentration broke. The candlestick clattered back to the floor with a sound that made them both flinch, and she turned and looked at him, and Harry met her eyes, very dark, very sharp, with the particular expression of someone who is simultaneously furious that you've interrupted them and intensely curious about who you are, and the magic in the air between them did something extraordinary. It reached. He felt it from his side, his own warmth and hum leaning forward like a compass needle swinging toward north. And he watched her feel it from her side, saw it in the way her eyes widened slightly, the way her held breath came out slowly, the way her free hand pressed harder against the carpet as though she needed something solid to hold on to. "You felt that," Harry said. It wasn't a question. The girl stared at him. "Who are you?" she said, and her voice was the voice of someone who has been raised to ask questions as statements of authority rather than requests for information. "You're in my house." "How are you in my house?" Creature would have, she stopped. Looked at him harder. "Your magic is loud." "Is it?" Harry looked down at his hands, half expecting to see something visible. It's the loudest I've ever felt. She didn't sound frightened by this. She sounded the way Harry felt when Gerald built a particularly impressive new section of web, genuinely, competitively interested. Who taught you? Your parents must be. I don't have parents, Harry said. They died. The girl went quiet for a moment in the specific way that someone goes quiet when they've asked a question they didn't realize was loaded. She didn't apologize. Harry got the impression that apologizing wasn't something she did reflexively, but something in her face shifted, small and genuine, before her default expression of imperious curiosity reasserted itself. I'm Bellatrix, she said. Bellatrix Black. Harry, he said. Just Harry. He paused. Potter, I think. They don't call me that. She tilted her head. The candlestick lay on the floor between them. Potter. That's a name. She said it as though she was consulting some internal catalogue. Old family? I have no idea. She considered this. Then she said, with the pragmatic decisiveness of someone resolving an administrative issue, sit down, then. You're blocking the light. Harry sat down on the carpet across the circle of candlestick holders. Up close, he could see that she'd been trying to levitate all of them simultaneously. There were faint traces in the carpet pile where the others had shifted slightly before falling back. She was doing at 7 what Harry suspected most people couldn't do at all. You're practicing, he said. Obviously. She picked up the fallen candlestick and replaced it in its spot in the circle with precise, irritable tidiness. I'm supposed to wait for Hogwarts. Mother says attempting wand work before formal instruction is dangerous. Father says, she paused, and the pause had an edge to it, very small and sharp like a paper cut. Father says the same. She looked at the wand in her hand. But I can feel it. The magic. It doesn't want to wait. Mine doesn't wait, Harry said. It just happens. She looked at him. Always. Mostly when I'm upset. But lately it happens other times too. This morning I made flowers bloom. He glanced at her. My aunt was not pleased. Something crossed Bellatrix's face, a flash of recognition so quick it was nearly invisible. My sister Andromeda made it snow in the sitting room last March, she said. Inside the house. Mother made her stand in the corner for an hour, but she couldn't stop smiling about it for a week. Her voice had a complicated texture, affection and something wistful and something else harder to name, a kind of inheritance of grief she was too young to fully understand yet. Magic wants to be used. Yes, Harry said immediately and completely, because this was the truest thing anyone had ever said in his presence and he felt it with his entire body. Yes, exactly. They looked at each other. 2 7-year-olds sitting on a blood-red carpet in a tall dark hallway full of moving portraits, and between them the air was warm and charged and bright with something neither of them had words for. Try again, Harry said, nodding at the candlesticks. She raised an eyebrow, a gesture of compressed authority that looked slightly absurd on a 7-year-old and would look extraordinary on the adult version she didn't know she was becoming. I wasn't asking for assistance. I know. But try again while I'm here. See if it's different. She looked at him for another second, apparently conducting some rapid internal assessment of whether he merited compliance. Then she turned back to the circle, raised the pale wand, and said the word, Wingardium Leviosa, though Harry didn't know that yet, didn't know it was Latin or that it was taught in first year or that in 30 years he would watch his best friend's younger brother say it badly in a train compartment, and the magic came out of her like a wave, warm and dark and precise, and Harry felt his own magic respond, not imitating but harmonizing, the way two instruments playing the same note in slightly different registers create a sound richer than either alone. All 6 candlestick holders rose from the floor simultaneously. Perfectly level. Perfectly still. A ring of floating brass suspended 2 feet off the carpet while Bellatrix Black stared at them with an expression that was pure, unguarded, electrified joy, the kind of joy that doesn't have room for composure because it's too immediate and too real, and Harry felt the same expression on his own face and didn't try to hide it. "That's never happened before," she breathed. "First time for me too," Harry said. She turned to look at him. The candlestick stayed up. "It's you," she said. "Something about you. Your magic and mine, they recognize each other," Harry finished. "Yes." She stared at him with that intense, cataloging focus. "That's exactly it." They stayed like that for a long moment with 6 brass candlestick holders floating between them in a ring, and the magic in the air was warm and mutual and strangely domestic, like the light that comes through a window on a good morning. Harry thought this was probably the best he'd felt since Gerald. He thought that this girl, fierce and imperious and wholly unself-conscious in her ambition, was the most interesting person he had ever met. He thought that her magic and his felt like they'd been waiting to find each other the way the pieces of something find each other before they become a whole. Then a door opened somewhere below them, a heavy door on heavy hinges, and a woman's voice called Bellatrix in a tone that communicated, with magnificent efficiency, an entire language of expectation. The candlestick holders dropped. Bellatrix was on her feet instantly, wand tucked away into her sleeve with the practiced ease of someone who had made this motion a reflex, the ink-stained sleeve straightened. She looked at Harry with an expression he couldn't quite read, reluctant, and sharp, and something urgent underneath it all. "You need to go," she said. "Before anyone sees." "I don't know how I got here," Harry said honestly. "I don't know how to go back." She looked at his hands. She looked at the space between them where the magic still hummed faintly, echoing. Then she took one fast, decisive step toward him and pressed something small and cool into his right palm and closed his fingers around it. Her hand over his lasted exactly 1 second, but in that second the magic blazed, a full sharp flare of it, white-hot and mutual and unmistakably a marking, the kind that goes bone-deep and doesn't wash out, and then she let go. Harry opened his hand. It was a small dark stone, smooth and oval, with a faint mark on it that looked almost like a letter. "So your magic remembers," she said. "Even if you forget." "Bellatrix." Her mother's voice, closer now. Bellatrix stepped back. She looked at him, and for one unguarded moment the imperious mask was entirely absent and she was just a girl, 7 years old, in a too large hallway, and her expression said something that her voice didn't have time to say, something that was half "don't go" and half "come back" and half something else entirely that she didn't have words for yet because she was 7 and some feelings take decades to name. The floor dropped. Harry grabbed for the mattress edge. The bright line came back under the cupboard door, thin and golden, and Gerald was in his corner, and the August heat returned like a wall, and Harry was back in the cupboard under the stairs with his heart hammering and one hand closed around empty air because the stone was gone. He opened his fingers. Nothing. His palm was warm where she'd pressed it. The warmth faded slowly, the way the impression of sunlight fades when a cloud comes over, but it didn't fade entirely. There was something left, some echo, some resonance in the bones of that hand that felt like a door that had been opened and left that way. He lay on his back. Gerald spun silk. The sprinkler outside went on and off. Harry put his hand over his sternum and felt the new thing there, the mark that had no surface, the key that had turned in the lock, and thought about dark curls and brass candlestick holders floating in a ring and the voice of a girl who said, "So your magic remembers, even if you forget." He didn't forget. Not for one day of what came after. 4 years later, September 1st, King's Cross Station was exactly as chaotic as a place could be while still technically functioning as public transport infrastructure. Harry moved through it, 11 now, with Hedwig's cage balanced on his trolley and a world of things he didn't know pressing in on all sides, and felt the thinning of the barrier between Platform 9 and Platform 10 as though he were walking towards something he'd been aimed at his whole short life. The Weasleys had shown him, and the oldest boy Percy had gone first with his chest out, and then the twins had gone together in a deliberate act of coordinated bravado, and then Ron had gone in an accidental stumble of nervousness, and Harry had looked at the barrier and thought all right then, and walked through it without slowing down, because the magic in his sternum was humming and he'd learned, across 4 years of living with people who feared what he was, that the worst thing you could do with magic was teach it to hesitate. The Hogwarts Express was red and enormous, and the platform smelled of steam and coal and something indefinably exciting, which Harry would later identify as the collective anticipation of 200 children who are about to become something other than what they were this morning. He found a compartment, stowed his trunk, installed Hedwig, and sat down, and the mark in his sternum hummed warmly, and he pressed his right hand, the hand she'd pressed the stone into, 4 years ago in another time, against his chest, and felt it pulse once in response. He didn't know what it meant yet. He only knew it was there. The train lurched into motion just as a red-haired boy appeared in the compartment doorway looking slightly frantic and asked if everywhere else was full, and Harry said yes it was and moved Hedwig's cage to make room, and the countryside began sliding past the windows in great green sheets, and the adventure began doing what adventures do. It began, but underneath it, constant and low and patient as a deep current, the magic hummed in the bone of his sternum where a girl in 1977 had pressed a stone and said, "So your magic remembers." He remembered. He would keep remembering. That wasn't the question. The question was what remembering was going to cost him. The question was what the magic was for. The question was why it had chosen a girl who, by 1991, was in a prison at the center of the North Sea, locked in a cell in the dark, and whether she remembered too. That question didn't have an answer yet. It was only September. There was time. But the mark hummed, and Harry pressed his palm flat against his sternum, and outside the window England went on being beautiful in the long amber light of early autumn, and something older than either of them was waking up. The sorting was everything and nothing like he'd expected. The hat went on his head and said things, said a great many things, in fact, about courage and cunning and ambition and danger and the difficulty of sorting someone whose magic was operating on a frequency the hat described as distinctly unusual, and Harry sat under the hat in front of the entire school and thought, with the focused clarity of someone who has learned to direct their internal weather, I know what I am. Put me where I belong. The hat was quiet for a moment. Then, do you, now? Yes. Another pause, longer, interested. You're not afraid. No. Most are. I know. I've been frightened plenty. I'm not frightened of this. The hat made a sound that might have been the sorting hat equivalent of appreciation. Then it said, aloud, for the whole hall, Gryffindor. The table on the far left erupted, and the twins from the train, Fred and George, who Harry had already identified as a pair of forces of nature barely contained within the formal structure of their uniforms, stood up and started a round of applause that the rest of the table joined with the enthusiasm of people welcoming one of their own, and Harry walked to the Gryffindor table feeling the warmth of it like the warmth of belonging, which he'd had so little of that even a temporary conditional version of it hit with considerable force. He sat down. Across the hall, the teacher's table ran the full length of the room. Harry scanned it with the instinct he developed over 4 years of reading his environment for information, cataloging who looked pleased and who looked wary and who looked like they were already bored. Quirrell, the defense teacher, had the hat already, so he'd been sorted once. McGonagall looked formidably pleased. Snape, in black at the end of the table, was already looking at Harry with an expression of compressed and highly organized dislike that Harry found interesting in its intensity. That much feeling took work. At the center of the table sat Dumbledore, and Dumbledore was looking at Harry, and his expression was something more complicated than any of the others, warm, yes, and intelligent, yes, but there was something else running underneath the warmth, something that made the calculation in it visible for just a moment before the benevolence settled back over the top of it like cream over milk. Harry had learned to read expressions in the school of living with people who didn't want him there. He was very good at it. He noted Dumbledore's expression, filed it away, said nothing, and reached for the roast potatoes when they appeared. The feast was extraordinary. Ron, across from him, ate with the specific focused joy of someone who has grown up with enough siblings to know you don't get the good bits if you stop to be polite about it. Hermione Granger, whom Harry had encountered briefly on the train, sat 2 seats down and was already asking Percy Weasley about the exact curricula of each subject in what appeared to be a pre-prepared list of questions. Harry found her competence almost as interesting as Bellatrix's had been, though the quality of it was different, organized where Bellatrix had been instinctive, methodical where Bellatrix had been visceral. He was thinking about the magic. He was always thinking about the magic lately, because the closer he'd come to Hogwarts the louder the mark had hummed, as though Hogwarts and whatever lived in Hogwarts's history and stone and accumulated centuries of magical education was resonant with the bond, amplifying it. He'd told nobody. This was standard procedure, keep the important things internal, but he'd also noticed, for the first time, that he couldn't feel the end of his own magic. Usually there was an edge, a border, the way there's a wall at the end of a garden. He reached for the edge now, experimentally, under the noise of the feast and the students around him. No edge. Just more. Just depth, going down and down and down into something vast and warm and impossibly old. Across the hall, Dumbledore's eyes were on him. Harry picked up a chicken leg and ate it, because whatever was coming could wait until he'd had dinner. It was in charms, 3 weeks in, October now, with the castle getting its autumn personality back, the corridors darkening by 4 o'clock and the torches coming on with the particular warm defiance of fire against the dark, that something happened which was not in any lesson plan. Flitwick was teaching first years the hovering charm. The standard educational progression, theory first, wrist movement practice, then attempt. Ron was watching his feather with the expression of someone trying to lift something with their eyes. Hermione had already gotten hers airborne on the second try and was now hovering it in precise circles, which nobody had asked for but which she appeared to find personally necessary. Harry's feather was on the desk in front of him and he was looking at it and feeling the mark in his sternum do something it hadn't done before. Instead of the steady warm hum, it was pulling, directional, like a compass needle swinging toward a specific bearing rather than simply pointing north. He looked at the feather. The feather rose. Not slowly, not wobbling, not with the effortful visible struggle of someone working against their own limitations. It rose smoothly, the way things rise when the magic doing the lifting is entirely comfortable with the task, and it kept going, past hover height, up to eye level, up to the top of his desk, and Harry raised his hand and the feather tracked his hand the way a kite tracks wind, perfectly responsive, perfectly smooth. He was 11. This was a hovering charm. He was aware that what he was doing with a hovering charm was broadly similar to what Bellatrix had been doing with a levitation spell at age 7 with an untrained wand, and the comparison made the mark pulse warm and the pull tighten. "Mr. Potter," said Flitwick from the front of the class, in a tone of voice that was not alarmed but was attentive in a particular way that teachers get when something unexpected is happening that they haven't categorized yet. "Sir," Harry said. "Can you lower it, please?" Harry lowered the feather. Then he raised it again, higher than before, and said, "Is there a reason it should stop at hover height?" Flitwick looked at him with his head tilted and his tiny body very still. "No pedagogical reason," he said carefully. "The charm's ceiling is a matter of the caster's intent and power, not the charm itself. You're simply, the standard instruction stops at hover height because that's where most first-year students. Can I try something else?" Harry asked. He wasn't asking permission exactly. He was asking whether now was a good time, which is a different thing. Flitwick looked at him for another second. Then, with the expression of a man who is choosing to be interested rather than alarmed, said, "Go on, then." Harry looked at all the other feathers on all the other desks. There were 17 other first-year Gryffindors in the room. He thought about Bellatrix and all 6 candlestick holders. He thought about the chord, the harmonic, 2 instruments finding the same note. He looked at the 17 feathers and felt the magic in the room, not just his, but all the ambient, early learning, slightly panicked first-year magic crackling around him like static, and he reached for it, not to take it, but to organize it, the way you might suggest to a river that it consider a slightly different course. All 17 feathers rose simultaneously. The room went absolutely silent. Ron said, "Bloody hell," in a reverent whisper. 10 points to Gryffindor, said Flitwick, in the slightly faint tone of someone recalibrating their entire framework, and we will, yes, that's, Mr. Potter, would you please come speak with me after class? Harry set the feathers down gently. Of course, he said, and the mark in his sternum was singing. Flitwick spoke to Dumbledore that evening. Dumbledore spoke to nobody, but he walked to his study window and looked at the Hogwarts grounds in the long way of a man doing complex arithmetic, and in the castle walls, in the ancient stone that had been laid when magic and politics and family lines were all a single tangled thing. Something resonated with the frequency of a bond centuries old being fed by its first significant anchor point, pulsing once outward like a bell strike, concentric rings of soundless magic spreading out from the castle and across the North Sea. In Azkaban, in a cell at the center of nothing, something stirred. Not a woman. Not yet the woman who would scream in the ministry or raise her wand at people she'd once called family. Something less formed than that. A person worn down to an essence. The thing that remains when everything else has been eaten away. The pulse reached the cell. And in the dark, in the cold, in the absolute emptiness of a place designed to take everything from you, something that had been entirely still for years made the smallest possible motion, a hand, uncurling from a fist, and in the palm of that hand was the ghost of a warmth that had been there once, a long time ago, before everything, when the magic had reached and recognized and said here and you and remember. A hand, uncurling. A pulse from a distant castle. A thread between them, old and gold and patient as the tide. Chapter 2, The Girl in the Stone. The defense against the dark arts classroom smelled like garlic and mild anxiety, which was Professor Quirrell's fault on both counts. He'd festooned the room with strings of it by October, garlic braids draped over the doorframe, garlic hanging from the ceiling beams, garlic arranged along the windowsills with the dedication of a man who had either a genuine vampire problem or a genuine garlic problem, and the anxiety was simply ambient, a feature of spending an hour a week with a teacher who stuttered through explanations while his turban bobbed and his eyes moved in ways that didn't quite match what his mouth was saying. Harry sat in the third row and listened and watched and filed things away. He'd decided in the first week that Quirrell was afraid of something specific, not the general vague fear that made him stutter and flinch. Specific fear had a texture, it was directional, it showed up in repeated glances and interrupted sentences and the particular way someone arranged themselves in a room. Quirrell arranged himself to always have his back to the wall and his turban facing the class. Harry had noted this and said nothing about it to anyone except the small, quiet archive inside himself where he kept things that didn't have explanations yet. Today's lesson was memory charms. Theory only. Flitwick had said something at breakfast about being glad they weren't attempting practical work until fourth year at the earliest, and McGonagall had agreed with the grim satisfaction of someone who had seen what happened when they tried it earlier. But Quirrell had a demonstration planned involving a stored memory impression in a glass vial, which he'd apparently borrowed from the restricted section of the library on special dispensation, and Harry was paying close attention because anything involving the actual mechanics of memory was interesting in ways that went beyond the academic. The OBBB, Quirrell stopped. Cleared his throat. The obliviate charm, he said, with the concentrated effort of someone manually overriding a physical symptom, works by targeting the indexing of a memory rather than the memory itself. You don't erase. You make the memory unfindable. It sits in the mind like a book in a very large library after someone has removed it from the CC catalog. The information is there. The mind simply cannot locate it. Hermione had her quill moving before he'd finished the sentence. Ron was drawing something in the margin of his parchment that Harry suspected was a dragon. What's in the vial? Neville Longbottom asked from behind Harry. Neville asked questions in the tone of someone who has been told his questions are not welcome often enough that each one costs him something, and Harry respected the courage in it. Ah. Quirrell turned to the vial on his desk, dark blue glass, sealed with wax, the size of a perfume bottle, and clearly agitated, because the contents moved with a faint luminescence even though there was no light source inside it that would account for the glow. This is a compressed memory impression. Not a full memory. A fragment, with the obliviate still acting on it, which is why it's contained. It gives off a residual charm pulse. Harmless in small quantities. It was used to demonstrate the charm's EFF effects without casting on a live subject. He set it on the desk. It pulsed. Blue-white, regular, rhythmic, like a very slow heartbeat. The pulse affects, well. The charm pulse can, in concentrated exposure, trigger associative memory responses in nearby, but it's harmless, he said again, more quickly, entirely harmless at this distance. You'll simply observe the vial fell off the desk. Nobody pushed it. Quirrell was standing 3 feet away. It simply fell, with the decisive sudden movement of an object that has decided it is done being where it was, and hit the stone floor and didn't break because Quirrell lunged and caught it with reflexes that were much faster than his general air of nervous incompetence would have suggested, and the catch involved a sharp collision of his hands and the air directly over the vial, and the wax seal cracked, and the blue-white pulse flared outward from the crack like a dropped stone in still water, a single ring of concentric light expanding across the classroom floor and up through the desks and through 22 first-year students and Harry went sideways. Not physically. He didn't fall out of his chair or make a sound. He went sideways internally, the way he had on that August afternoon in the cupboard when the floor dropped and the magic took him somewhere, that same lurch, that same half-second of weightlessness in the stomach, and the classroom went gray, edges blurring, the voices of the other students becoming thin and distant like sound heard through water, and then the gray resolved into something else, dark stone. Cold. The smell of salt water and something older and worse underneath it, something that was the smell of despair the way certain buildings have the smell of the specific thing that happened in them for too long. Narrow. Low ceiling. A single grade of light very far up that was the color of winter and gave no warmth. A cell. He was not in the cell. He was in the room in the same way a reflection is in a mirror, present but not there, not physical, looking through something rather than being inside it. He could feel the cold as a sensation without it actually touching him. She was sitting with her back against the far wall. Not sitting the way people sit when they're resting. Sitting the way things sit that have forgotten their people, the deep, boneless stillness of something that has stopped making plans for the next minute because planning the next minute requires believing the next minute will be different from this one. Her hair was dark and very long and utterly disordered, and her face, he could see her face from this angle, from this strange observer's position above and to the left, her face was thin. Dramatically, brutally thin in the way that spoke of years rather than months, and even so, even through everything that had been done to it, he could see the architecture of something fierce. High cheekbones. A jaw that suggested considerable stubbornness. Eyes that were closed but that had faint lines at the corners from years of narrowing. He knew her. He knew her the way you know a piece of music you heard once as a very young child and forgot consciously but that your body still carries in its cellular memory, the way your feet know how to find a step in a staircase you walked every day and haven't walked in years. He knew her the way he knew the warmth in his right hand, the hand she'd pressed the stone into, the hand that still carried some deep bone echo of that moment in 1977 when she'd pressed her palm over his fingers and the magic had blazed white-hot and said here and you and forever. Bellatrix Black. Not the 7-year-old girl with the ink-stained sleeve and the floating candlestick holders. The adult. The aftermath. The thing that Azkaban had been making of her for years. He wanted to say her name. He didn't know if the vision space worked that way. He tried anyway, Bellatrix, and something happened. Not a sound, more like a vibration, a ripple in whatever medium connected this moment to hers. She went very still. Which was extraordinary because she'd been entirely still already, but this was a different stillness, not the stillness of absence but the stillness of attention, of something suddenly listening. Her eyes opened. They were the same dark eyes. The same intensity, though the thing behind the intensity had changed, the keen, cataloging intelligence he'd seen in the hallway of Grimmauld Place was still there somewhere underneath, like bedrock under damaged ground, but the surface was all ice and damage and the specific hollowness that dementors leave when they've been feeding on you for years. She looked at the wall in front of her. She looked at the thin winter light from the grate. She looked with the focused attention of someone who has heard something impossible and is checking the available evidence. Then, very quietly, in a voice that was rougher than her 7-year-old voice had been but recognizably the same voice, the voice of someone who asks questions as statements of authority, she said, Potter. Not a question. A fact, stated with the flat conviction of someone identifying something they've been trying to name for a long time. Harry felt the bond, the mark, the lock that had been turned, the thing in his sternum, go incandescent, a full flare of warmth and recognition so fierce it was almost physical pain, and through it he understood with sudden, vertiginous clarity that she'd been feeling it all along. Not the way he felt it, he'd had 4 years of growing up, of Hogwarts, of magic getting louder. She'd had Azkaban. But underneath Azkaban, underneath everything they'd done to her and everything she'd done to herself, the bond had been there. Constant. Warm. The one warm thing in the coldest place on earth. Bellatrix, he said, or tried to say, and the vision cracked, Potter. Hermione's hand on his arm. Real, actual, physical, in the defense against the dark arts classroom that smelled of garlic and anxiety, with 22 first years staring at him and Quirrell clutching the nowry sealed veil with both hands and the expression of a man managing a small crisis. Harry blinked. The classroom came back in full detail. The desks. The torchlight. Neville looking at him with large, concerned eyes from the row behind. Are you all right? Hermione said, with the brisk efficiency she used when she was covering the fact that she'd been genuinely worried. You went completely blank for about 45 seconds. The pulse, Quirrell said, somewhat breathlessly, the associative memory response. I did say it could, perfectly harmless, but some students with more active magical signatures can experience a stronger. Are you hurt? No, Harry said. He was aware of his own heartbeat. He was aware of the mark in his sternum which was not pulsing rhythmically anymore but burning, steady and constant, with none of its usual patience. Whatever the memory pulse had done, it had opened a channel, and the channel was still partly open, and through it he could feel the faintest thread of cold, Azkaban cold, grey and salt-touched and vast, and underneath the cold, aware, alert, listening, her. Mr. Potter, Quirrell said again, more carefully. I'm fine, Harry said. He turned to look at Quirrell, and whatever was on his face, not distress, not fear, but the composed intensity of someone who has just received very significant information and is processing it, made Quirrell step back half a step, which was interesting. Class dismissed, Quirrell said. Tea 10 minutes early. Read Chapter 4. Harry did not go to Chapter 4. He went to the library. More specifically, he went to the section of the library that dealt with magical bonds, which was tucked into a corner near the restricted section with the energy of something that isn't quite restricted but that nobody had made it particularly easy to access either. The books here were old, the specific oldness of books that have been consulted enough to be worn but not replaced, their spines cracked and their pages soft with use. He pulled 3 books, stacked them on the nearest table, and started reading with the focused efficiency he developed in the absence of anyone to explain things to him, take in information quickly, cross-reference aggressively, trust your own assessment of which details matter. Bonds of Ancient Magic, 3rd century, translation from Latin, 30 pages on the taxonomy of magical connections between individuals. Soul bonds, blood bonds, craft bonds, bonds of oath and debt. A passage on bonds formed in early childhood. These are the most indelible and the least understood, as they typically form in the absence of formal magical training and thus operate outside the usual frameworks of intent. A bond formed between untrained children of significant magical potential may be of a class entirely without precedent, as the magic involved is not channeled by education or practice but rather by the raw architectural force of innate power seeking complementary structure. Complementary structure. Harry pressed his right hand flat on the table and felt the old echo in the bones. He read for 2 hours. He found that soul bonds were considered extinct by most modern magical scholars, that the last confirmed bond of this type had been documented in the 15th century, that bonds of this type were considered in their formation period, which lasted from the first moment of recognition until the bond fully matured, a period that could take decades, to be self-protective, which meant that the 2 bonded individuals could not permanently harm each other, and that the full activation of such a bond Required both parties to consciously acknowledge it. He sat with that last piece of information for a long moment. She'd said his name. In the vision. Potter. With the flat conviction of someone who already knew. What are you reading? Ron dropped into the seat across from him with the heavy casualness of someone who has not been reading and is mildly suspicious of those who have. He peered at the spine of the nearest book. Magical Bonds. Is that for class? No, Harry said. Ron waited. Ron was better at waiting than he appeared, which was one of the better things about him. Something happened in defense, Harry said. When the vial cracked. The pulse, Quirrell said it triggers associative memory responses. He paused. I saw something. Saw what? Harry looked at him. Ron was his friend, genuinely, completely, without qualification, from the first hour on the train where he'd shared his sandwiches and explained chocolate frog cards with the systematic enthusiasm of a specialist. He was also 11 years old and had 6 siblings and a mother who wrote worried letters twice a week and a father who worked at the ministry, which meant that Ron's relationship with the world was, fundamentally, the relationship of someone who has always had people to catch him. Some things you tested your friends with carefully before you handed them the full weight. I saw Azkaban, Harry said. And someone in it. Ron's expression cycled through several phases: initial interest, growing unease, and then the expression specific to someone who has grown up with a magical family and knows what Azkaban means at a level that goes beyond academic. Who, he said, in a lower voice. Does the name Bellatrix Black mean anything to you? The silence that followed was not the silence of someone drawing a blank. It was the silence of someone who has pulled up a card from a very specific drawer. Bellatrix Lestrange, Ron said. She's in Azkaban. She was a Death Eater. One of you-know-who's, one of Voldemort's. He said the name with the conscious effort of someone using it because Harry had told him to. She and her husband and another man, they tortured 2 Aurors. Neville's parents. He glanced toward the library door reflexively. Frank and Alice Longbottom. Into insanity. They're at St. Mungo's. They've been there since the same time you-know-who fell. She got life in Azkaban. Harry sat with this. The girl in the dark hallway. The circle of floating candlestick holders. So your magic remembers, even if you forget. You know her. Ron said, because he was watching Harry's face and whatever was on it had flagged his attention. I met her once, Harry said. When I was 7. It's complicated. Harry. She tortured 2 people into insanity. I know. She's a Death Eater. I know, Ron. Then why are you? Ron gestured at the books. Because something connected my magic to hers when I was 7 years old, Harry said, before any of that happened, and whatever that something is, it woke up today, and I need to understand it. He looked at Ron. I'm not saying she's good. I'm not saying she didn't do those things. I'm saying my magic is involved with hers in a way I didn't choose and I need to understand what that means before anyone else figures it out and decides what it means for me. Ron was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, with the practicality that was one of his most underrated qualities, right. What do these books say, then? Harry showed him the passage on complementary structure. Ron read it with the focused attention of someone taking a practical problem seriously. When he was done, he said, so you and a convicted torturer-murderer have a soul bond? Potentially. From when you were 7. Yes. And she's in Azkaban. Yes. This, Ron said, with the measured resignation of someone accepting a situation they cannot improve by refusing to accept it, is going to be mental, isn't it? Almost certainly, Harry said. Ron reached across the table and turned to the next page of Bonds of Ancient Magic. Right, he said. Better read faster, then. Hermione found them 40 minutes later and managed, in under 10 minutes of rapid intake, to absorb everything they'd read and generate 6 follow-up questions, one of which, but what does the bond want from them, specifically, not what it does to them but what it's oriented toward, turned out to be more useful than anything Harry had found in 3 hours of reading. She pulled a fourth book from the shelf that Harry had missed, The Architecture of Magical Sympathy, which had the specific look of a book that considered itself more important than it was being treated, and found a passage in under 5 minutes, Bonds of the sympathetic type, she read aloud, with her quill poised for note-taking, are not passive connections but active ones. They are, in their essential function, channels of magical communication and reinforcement. The bond does not simply link two individuals, it constitutes a sustained argument between their magical cores about what they are meant to become. In cases where the two individuals have developed along divergent paths, morally, philosophically, or in their relationship to the practice of magic itself, the bond will generate increasing pressure toward convergence. This convergence can manifest as shared visions, sympathetic magical events, emotional resonance, and in the most advanced stages, she looked up. Harry. Keep going. In the most advanced stages, the bond may act to physically compel one or both parties toward proximity, overriding other loyalties, commitments, or, and this is the part that's alarming, even magical oaths and vows of allegiance. The library was quiet around them. From somewhere in the stacks came the shuffling of Madame Pants reorganizing something. The torches burned low and orange. Overriding oaths of allegiance, Harry said. She swore to Voldemort, Hermione said, because Hermione had decided within approximately 30 seconds of Harry first saying the name aloud that she was not going to dance around the fact of it. Death Eaters take an oath. The dark mark is, it's a binding. A very powerful one. She paused. If the bond is older than the mark, and stronger, it is, Harry said. He didn't know how he knew this. He knew it the way he knew Gerald was competent, it was simply evident. It's older. By about 14 years. Hermione wrote something in her notes. Ron, reading over her shoulder, said, so the bond can override the mark, with the energy of someone identifying a tactical advantage. Theoretically, Hermione said cautiously. Not theoretically, Harry said. She said my name. In the vision. She knew it was me. She's aware of the bond, she was already aware of it, before I found out. Of course she was aware, Hermione said, and her voice had the brisk, slightly frustrated quality of someone being logical about something uncomfortable. She's been in Azkaban for years. She has nothing but her mind and whatever the Dementors haven't managed to eat. If there's one warm thing in that darkness, she stopped. Made herself finish the sentence. She would know it exactly. She would hold on to it. The three of them sat with this. Outside the library window, the sky was the deep grey of a Scottish October evening, and the castle turrets cut sharp dark shapes against it, and somewhere over the North Sea a prison sat on a rock and a woman sat in a cell and held on to one warm thing in the dark with both hands. Does Dumbledore know? Ron asked. Harry thought of Dumbledore's expression at the sorting feast. That moment of careful warmth over calculation. The expression of someone who was already accounting for something. Yes, Harry said. And hasn't said anything, Ron said. No. Ron's expression suggested he had opinions about this that were being managed. Okay. So what do we do? Harry closed the book in front of him. We learn everything we can before he decides to explain it to us in a way that tells us exactly what he wants us to know and nothing else. He looked at the stack of books. Because whatever this bond is and whatever it's going to do, it belongs to me and to her. Nobody else. He went to Dumbledore 3 days later. Not because Dumbledore had summoned him, he hadn't, but because going on his own terms was better than waiting to be managed, and Harry had understood this principle with absolute clarity from about age 8, when he'd figured out that letting Vernon control the conditions of every interaction meant that every interaction was already lost. The gargoyle admitted him when he said the password, Sherbet Lemon, which Ron had gotten from one of the twins, and he went up the spiral staircase and knocked and walked into Dumbledore's office with the composed certainty of someone who belongs where they're standing. The office was extraordinary and he gave himself exactly 3 seconds to note it: the portraits of previous headmasters dozing in their frames, the collection of delicate spinning instruments on a half-moon table, the massive claw-footed desk, the pensieve in its shallow stone basin, and then he sat down in the chair across from Dumbledore's desk and waited. Dumbledore looked at him from behind half-moon spectacles with those blue eyes that had the quality of looking at the sky from the bottom of a very clear lake, bright, deep, and not quite there the way surface things are there. He had the expression of a man who has been expecting a visitor and is pleasantly surprised by the timing. "Harry," he said warmly. "I wondered when we might have the chance to." "You already know about the bond," Harry said. Not an accusation. A fact, stated in the same flat tone he'd heard Bellatrix use, the tone of someone who prefers that things be what they are. Dumbledore was quiet for precisely 1 beat. In that beat, the calculation under the warmth made a brief, clear appearance. Then the warmth settled back, but differently, with a quality of respect in it, the kind that gets offered when someone has demonstrated that they won't be managed. "I was aware of a connection," Dumbledore said. "The nature of it was not fully, soul bond," Harry said. "Formed 1977. When I was pulled back in time by accidental magic and met Bellatrix Black in Grimmauld Place. Our magic recognized each other. The bond formed from the first contact." He paused. "I read the books." Dumbledore was looking at him with an expression that was genuinely unguarded for about 3 seconds, surprise, real and unperformed, which meant this specific piece of information was new to him. The time travel piece. The 1977 piece. He hadn't known the origin. "I was aware of the bond's existence as a fact," Dumbledore said, more carefully, "from the time of your arrival at Hogwarts. The castle's wards registered it, very old magic, rather unmistakable once you know what you're looking for. I did not know its origin." He looked at Harry. "You were pulled back in time. At 7. Yes. Accidental magic, you said." "Yes." Harry paused. "Although I'm not sure it was entirely accidental. It felt, directed. Like something wanted it to happen." Dumbledore's fingers touched his lips in the gesture of a man thinking very fast. "The bond's own originating force," he murmured, more to himself than to Harry. "Drawing its own creation into existence. That would require a degree of recursive temporal magic that is, extraordinary," Harry said. "Yes. I know." He looked at Dumbledore steadily. "Why didn't you tell me?" The silence was long and not uncomfortable. Dumbledore looked at Harry with the quality of a man making a decision, and Harry looked back with the quality of a boy who will wait as long as necessary and is not blinking. "Because I did not know," Dumbledore said finally, "how to tell an 11-year-old child that the woman his magic is bonded to is a convicted torturer in Azkaban who swore herself to the darkest wizard of the age." He paused. It was a failure of judgment, Harry. I was managing information when I should have been sharing it. I apologize for that." The apology was genuine. Harry knew genuine apologies, he'd had so few of them in his life that he could identify them precisely. He nodded. "Can the bond be severed?" he asked. "No. Can it be dampened or redirected?" "Not without significant damage to both parties." "And Voldemort," he said it deliberately, watched Dumbledore absorb the absence of flinching, "does he know about it?" Something crossed Dumbledore's face. Something old and weighted and weary. "I believe," he said carefully, "that he may have recently become aware of it. Given that the bond's activation pulse when you began practicing magic at Hogwarts would have been, perceptible, to someone attuned to Bellatrix Lestrange's magical signature through the dark mark, he knows," Harry said. "Then he knows there's a bond between Bellatrix and me that can override the mark. Potentially, not potentially." Harry stood up. He wasn't angry. He was clear, which was sometimes a more powerful state. He knows his most loyal follower has a magical connection to the boy he tried to kill. That changes what he does with her. That changes what he does with me. He looked at Dumbledore. I need you to tell me everything you know about the bond's mechanics. Not the version you think is appropriate for an 11-year-old. Everything. Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. Then he stood too, and crossed to the pensieve, and said, "Sit back down, Harry. This will take some time." He left Dumbledore's office 2 hours later with considerably more information than he'd arrived with and a growing sense of the shape of things, not the full picture, because Dumbledore was constitutionally incapable of giving you the full picture, but enough to orient himself. Enough to start. The bond was real, was ancient, was unbreakable. It was also, Dumbledore had admitted with visible difficulty, functioning as a kind of magical accelerant, feeding Harry's power in ways that had no standard developmental explanation. The magic he'd demonstrated in charms, in his first 3 weeks, was not normal first-year magic. It was the magic of someone whose core was being continuously amplified by a second magical source, a source that was itself enormous, running in the dark and the cold of Azkaban but running nonetheless. She was feeding his power from a prison cell. Without knowing she was doing it, possibly. Or perhaps knowing precisely and doing it anyway, which given what he'd seen of her at 7 seemed more likely. He stood in the corridor outside the gargoyle and put his hand over his sternum and felt the mark burning steady and warm and enormous, and through it, faint as a radio signal at the edge of range, the threat of cold and the presence underneath it, aware, alert, listening. "I know," he said quietly, to no one visible. To her, wherever she was, through whatever medium the bond used for transmission. "I know about the bond. I know what you said in the vision. I'm going to figure this out." The thread of cold shifted. The presence behind it changed texture, something warmer moving through it, brief and fierce and very much like the expression she'd worn for that one unguarded moment in the hallway when she was 7 and she was just a girl and the magic had blazed between them like a door being opened from both sides at once. Then it was cold again. Then it was Azkaban. Harry walked back toward Gryffindor Tower through the darkened castle with the torches casting long warm shadows and his shadow going ahead of him, and his magic burning bigger and brighter and more OP than it had any right to be, and he thought, she's holding on. She's been holding on for years. She's in the coldest place on earth and she's holding the bond like a rope in the dark and she's still there. He thought, I need to be worth holding on to. He thought, I need to get very, very good very quickly, because whatever's coming, it's going to require everything I have and more. He took the stairs back to Gryffindor 3 at a time, and Hedwig hooted at him when he came in, and the fire in the common room was going, and Ron and Hermione were still up at the table with the books, and this, the warmth, the people who stayed up with their books because you needed them to, this was also something worth having. Worth protecting. Well? Hermione said. He knew about the bond, Harry said. Didn't know it started in 1977. Told me everything once I made it clear I wasn't leaving without the full version. He sat down. She's amplifying my magic. From Azkaban. That's why I've been, doing things you shouldn't be able to do yet, Hermione finished. That explains the charms lesson. It explains a lot of things. He looked at the book still open on the table. Voldemort knows about the bond. Probably recently. Which means he knows the mark on Bellatrix is operating against something that outranks it. He paused. Which means she's no longer just a prisoner in Azkaban. She's a liability. A potential defection point. Ron's face had the expression of someone doing strategic mathematics. What does he do with a liability? Depends whether he thinks he can use it first, Harry said. If he thinks he can use the bond to reach me through her, or use her as leverage, he tries that. If he thinks the bond is just a threat with no upside, he stopped. The fire crackled. He tries to have her killed, Hermione said quietly. Even in Azkaban, if he has people everywhere, Ron said, in the flat tone of someone who knows this from family history. Harry looked at the fire. He looked at his right hand, the hand that still held an old echo of warmth in its bones. He thought about the thread of cold over the North Sea and the presence underneath it, holding on. Then we don't give him time to decide, Harry said. We're 11, Ron said. I know. Harry looked at the books. Give me 2 years. The fire crackled again. Somewhere in the castle the clock struck 11. And the mark in Harry's sternum burned steady and constant as a lit window in the dark, and over the sea a woman with dark curls sat in a cold cell and felt it burn and held on tighter. Chapter 3, What Azkaban Left Behind. The breakout happened on a Tuesday in March, which was a deeply unremarkable day for something so significant: grey sky, light rain, the smell of wet stone and early spring mud coming in through the castle's open windows. Harry was in the middle of a transfiguration essay about the ethical considerations of human-to-animal transformation when he felt it. Not heard. Not saw. Felt, in the bond, through the channel that had been open and running since the memory pulse in October, a sudden violent lurch of sensation that was nothing like the steady warm hum he'd grown accustomed to. This was sharp and cold and desperate, the way a rope feels when something on the other end of it suddenly pulls with full weight, and Harry's quill stopped moving and he pressed his right hand flat against the table and went very still. Something had changed. Something had broken. Not the bond. The bond was blazing, more alive than he'd ever felt it, sudden and ferocious and urgent the way fire is urgent when wind hits it, but through it came something else, something he'd never felt before: cold air. Real cold air, not the ambient grey chill of Azkaban felt at distance, but wind, actual moving air, ocean cold with salt in it, and underneath it the desperate physical sensation of a body that hasn't moved properly in years suddenly being asked to move. She was out. Harry was on his feet before he'd consciously decided to stand. Across the library, because they'd migrated to the library for essays, which had become their default study location since October, Hermione looked up and saw his face and said, "What happened?" not as a question but as a diagnostic. "She's out," Harry said. "Somehow. She's out of Azkaban." Hermione's quill stopped. Ron, who had been tilted back in his chair in the precarious way that teachers were always warning him about, dropped all 4 legs to the floor. "How?" Ron said. "I don't know." Harry was still pressing his hand to the table and listening to the bond, which was coming in like a signal from something moving, which meant she was moving, which meant she was free and she was running and she was cold. God, she was cold, and disoriented, and the thing underneath the cold that was her, the essential fierce irreducible core of her, was burning with something between fury and terror and a third feeling he didn't have a word for. Something that was about him. Something that was about the bond. She knew exactly where the bond was pointing. She was following it. "She's coming here," Harry said. Another beat of silence. Then Hermione, with the rapid efficient processing that made her both invaluable and occasionally alarming, said, "She won't get into Hogwarts." "The wards, the bond is older than the wards," Harry said. He looked at her. "I think she might." He went to Dumbledore immediately, and Dumbledore already knew, of course he did, the castle's wards would have registered the moment a bonded individual began approaching, and the conversation was fast and stripped of anything that wasn't essential information. Dumbledore looked older than he had in October, which was interesting. Like a man whose calculations had outrun him slightly. "The Ministry will be notified within the hour," Dumbledore said. "A breakout from Azkaban, even a solitary one, triggers automatic alerts. Orders will be dispatched." "How long before they get here?" "To Hogwarts specifically?" 2 hours, perhaps. They won't know her destination." He paused. "Harry, I need to find her first," Harry said. "That is precisely what I'm concerned, because if Aurors find her first, they take her back," Harry said, with the clear patient tone he developed for conversations with Dumbledore where the most important thing was not to let the conversation become about his age, "and then she's back in Azkaban and Voldemort has 2 hours to decide whether she's more useful to him dead, which you told me he'd be considering. And I lose the only person whose magic is bonded to mine." He met Dumbledore's eyes. "I understand the concern. The concern is noted. I need to find her first." Dumbledore looked at him for a moment that stretched. Then he said, quietly, the Whomping Willow's east side. The bond will tell you the last bit. He paused. Harry. She is not the girl you met. You need to be prepared. I'm prepared, Harry said, and left. He went alone. He'd told Ron and Hermione to stay. Ron had objected, Hermione had objected more articulately, and Harry had said, I need you inside the castle. If this goes wrong in a way I can't handle, which it won't, I need people who can get Dumbledore fast. That's a real job. That matters. And Hermione had looked at him with the expression of someone who knew they were being managed but could see the logic in it, and Ron had said, 1 hour and then we're coming out, and Harry had taken that as agreement and gone. The grounds were wet and grey. The Whomping Willow stood at the edge of the grounds where the forest began to make suggestions about darkness, and it was moving in the wind in the particular way it moved when it was agitated rather than merely blustery, a full-body agitation, the kind that usually meant something had come too close to its root structure. Harry moved around it at a careful distance, keeping to the long way around, and followed the bond. It was like following a compass that was also afire. It pulled him northeast, along the edge of the forest where the trees thinned and the ground was soft with moss and early spring growth, toward a place where the Hogwarts wards made themselves felt as a pressure in the air, a wall of old magic buzzing like a very large, very controlled current. He stopped at the ward line and felt the bond on the other side of it, close, very close, and burning, and then felt something extraordinary happen. The wards bent. Not broke. Not failed. They bent, flexing around a point directly ahead of him, creating a narrow seam that pulsed with the same warm gold light he associated with the bond in his deepest registers, and through that seam she came. She came through the wards like someone walking through heavy curtains, with effort, with visible cost, stumbling the last step and catching herself against the bark of a birch tree at the forest's edge. She was barefoot on the wet grass. Her clothes were the grey of Azkaban issue, worn to the specific pail of cloth that has been washed too many times in cold water. Her hair was a catastrophe of dark tangles, too long, matted in places, but unmistakably hers. She was thin in a way that made Harry's chest hurt, not dramatically, not staggeringly, but the specific thinness of someone who has been inadequately fed for years, so that the structure of her face was more prominent than it should be, the cheekbones and jaw and the sharp line of her brow. She was shaking. He could see it from 10 feet away, a full-body tremor that was partly cold and partly exhaustion and partly, he thought, the sheer physical shock of being outside after years of being inside. The Dementor effect, the systematic draining of warmth and hope and memory, you could see the evidence of it in the way she stood, slightly folded, braced against the birch tree like someone managing a structural problem. But her eyes were open and focused and they found him immediately. Dark eyes. The same dark eyes. He knew them. He'd been 11 years old for 6 months and he'd spent a significant portion of those months knowing those eyes from a vision in a defense classroom, knowing them from the memory he'd kept like a lit candle since he was 7, and they were the same, battered and shadowed and carrying something terrible in their history, but the essential nature of them was the same. The intelligence was the same. The fierce irreducible core was the same. For a moment neither of them moved. Potter, she said. Her voice was rough, not from disuse, because she'd used it in the vision, but from years of Azkaban air, cold and salt and bad, and it came out ragged at the edges. But the tone was the same. Statement, not question. Authority, not inquiry. Even here, even like this, she could not make the word anything other than something she'd decided to say. You're barefoot, Harry said. She looked down at her feet. Wet grass. Her toes were dirty. She looked back at him with an expression that was not quite anything he could name, some compound of incredulity and exasperation and something underneath both of those that was raw and unguarded and real. That's what you say, she said. After all of, she stopped. Made a gesture that encompassed everything, the years, the cold, the Azkaban, the bond, the vision, the thread in the dark that had been the one warm thing. That's what you say. You're also shaking, Harry said. He was already moving, pulling off his outer robe, Hogwarts uniform, standard issue, but wool and warm, and holding it out. And you look cold. She stared at the robe. She stared at him. Her expression cycled through something, the specific cycling of a person who has been in Azkaban long enough that simple human kindness has become a thing that requires processing time. She took the robe. Put it on. It was far too big. He was 11 and she was a full adult, which meant it sat wrong, but she pulled it around her anyway and the shaking didn't stop but it reduced. "You're a child," she said. "I'm aware." She was looking at him with the same cataloging intensity she'd had at 7, but now it was turned up significantly, scanning him with the focus of someone who has been waiting a long time to see something and is now checking it against the version they'd carried in their head. "The bond is yours. You're his. Not Voldemort," he heard the distinction. "Harry Potter. The boy the bond belonged to." She was confirming he was real. "It's mine," Harry agreed. "And yours, I think." Something crossed her face at yours. Something he filed away carefully. "How did you get out?" he asked. She leaned against the birch tree and the motion was controlled, deliberate, the motion of someone who is managing their body's current state with intelligence rather than letting it manage her. "The bond," she said. "It pulled." She looked at the ward line she'd come through. "I've felt it for years. Constant. She stopped. The raw thing moved across her face again. "Like a window," she said finally. "The only light." She turned back to him. 3 days ago it changed. Became louder. More urgent. Like something had shifted on your end. The vision. The memory pulse in Quirrell's class. He'd opened the channel more fully, reached through, said her name. It had shifted something on her end too. The pulling had increased. "The bond woke up properly in October," Harry said. "I felt you. You said my name. I knew who you were," she said, and her voice had an edge now, not hostile, but the edge of a person who knows something and has known it for a long time and is assessing whether you know it too. "I've known since the first year. Since before." She paused. "The stone," she said. "You remember the stone." His right hand closed involuntarily. "The old echo in the bones. I remember. I made that stone." She looked at his hand. 7 years old and I made a bond anchor stone without knowing what it was. Because my magic wanted to. Her voice had the flat tone of someone describing a geological fact. "My magic wanted to mark you and I did it, and then you disappeared, and I carried the knowledge of what I'd done, in Hogwarts, and after, and in everything that came after that, and in Azkaban it was the one thing they couldn't reach." Her dark eyes were steady on his. "The Dementors eat happiness. Warmth. Hope. They couldn't eat the bond because the bond isn't an emotion. It's a structure. It's architecture. It's made of magic, not of feeling, so they couldn't touch it." Something moved in her expression, a kind of dark, private triumph. "I held it and I came back to it every day for years and it was the only thing I knew was real." Harry listened to this. He absorbed it completely. The image of her in the cell, hand uncurling from a fist, he understood now what she'd been uncurling toward. "The breakout," he said. "You said the bond pulled. Did it pull you physically, or, it pulled the cell door open," she said. Which landed in the air between them like something extraordinary stated as something perfectly ordinary. "The bars. The locks. All of it. I was sitting in the cell and the bond flared, bigger than it's ever been, which I understand now was you approaching the castle, and every lock on my cell opened simultaneously and when I walked out, every lock on every door between me and the sea opened the same way." She looked at him. "Your magic opened Azkaban." Harry absorbed this too. He thought about what the books had said, that in the advanced stages of a bond, it could compel toward proximity. It hadn't just pulled her toward him. It had actively dismantled the things between them. You walked straight from Azkaban to Hogwarts, Harry said. I ran most of the way, she said, with the dry precision of someone being accurate. He almost laughed. He didn't quite, but he almost did, and something in his almost laugh registered on her face. The expression shifted, some tension going out of it that he hadn't noticed was there until it left, and for just a moment he saw underneath the damage and the years and the Azkaban rawness the shape of something familiar, the girl in the dark hallway, cross-legged on the carpet, furious that you've interrupted her and intensely curious about who you are. She saw him see it. She didn't look away. You need to come inside, Harry said. Aurors will be here in less than 2 hours. I'm aware that being recaptured would be suboptimal, she said. And Dumbledore needs to know you're here. He paused. He already knows, probably. He knows most things before they happen. But he needs to talk to you. Something moved across her face at Dumbledore. Not fear, not anything as simple as fear, but the expression of someone with a complicated and weighted relationship to a name. Before we go in, Harry said, because there was something he needed to say and the grounds were the right place for it, open, honest, without walls, I need to say something. She waited. The rain had lightened to mist, settling on her wild hair, beating on the wool of his robe around her shoulders. She waited with the patience of someone who has done a great deal of waiting and has gotten very good at it. I know what you did, Harry said. The Longbottoms. I know. He held her gaze. I'm not pretending that didn't happen. I'm not going to pretend things away. That happened and it was real and Neville's parents are in St. Mungo's and that's there. That's part of what you are. Her jaw tightened. The raw thing went away and something harder replaced it, the specific heart of a person bracing for a verdict. But I also know that you were 7 years old in a dark hallway, Harry said, and your magic was the loudest thing I'd ever felt, and when those candlestick holders went up I felt, he paused. Because the word was important and he didn't want to use the wrong one. I felt like something was correct. Something that had been waiting to be correct finally was. He let that settle. And the bond isn't mine. It's ours. That means you're not a problem I'm dealing with. You're a person who's part of my magic and I'm a person who's part of yours. Which means we figure this out together, or neither of us figures it out. Silence. The mist came down. A bird called somewhere in the forest. Bellatrix looked at him with those dark eyes and the raw thing was back, fully back now, unguarded, and her expression was the one he'd seen at 7 when she'd been just a girl and the magic had blazed between them and she hadn't had words for what she felt, but now it was adult and it was complicated and it was real in a way that 7-year-old emotions aren't yet, and she said nothing for a long moment. Then she said, You're 11 years old. You said that already. I keep saying it because it keeps being true and it doesn't stop being. She stopped. You're 11 years old and you speak like. She looked away into the forest. Everyone in my life who ever spoke to me like that was trying to get something from me. I'm not trying to get anything, Harry said. I'm trying to deal with a reality. The reality is you and me and a bond and Voldemort who knows about the bond and Aurors who will be here in under 2 hours. He held out his hand. We can have the rest of this conversation inside, where it's warm. She looked at his hand for a long moment. The same hand she'd pressed the stone into, 20 years ago from her perspective, 4 years ago from his. She looked at it with the expression of someone making a real decision, not a forced decision, not a bond-compelled decision, but a choice made with clear eyes and full understanding of what it would cost. She took his hand. The bond didn't blaze this time. It did something quieter and more permanent. It settled, like a foundation finding bedrock, a deep vibration that started in their joined hands and ran through both of them and said yes and now and here in a register below language. They walked back across the wet grounds toward the castle. Dumbledore was waiting in his office with the specific prepared quality of a man who had used the last hour very efficiently. There was tea. There was a chair that had clearly been recently transfigured from something else into something more comfortable. There was a set of clothes folded on the corner of the desk, women's clothes, practical, dark, not Azkaban gray. Bellatrix walked into Dumbledore's office behind Harry and stopped in the doorway and looked at Dumbledore with an expression that was compound and layered and ancient in the way that expressions get between people with a long history. "Albus," she said. "Bellatrix," he said. "Please sit down. You've had rather a day." "Several years, actually," she said. But she sat. She picked up the tea, and the way her hands wrapped around it, both hands, absorbing the warmth with the focused intention of someone who has been cold for a very long time, was the most unguarded thing Harry had seen her do yet. "The Ministry," Harry said, sitting in his own chair without waiting to be offered it. "Has been contacted," Dumbledore said, "by me, personally, before they received the automated alert. The conversation was productive." His expression suggested the productivity had required effort. "There are circumstances surrounding Bellatrix's imprisonment that were not fully examined at trial. Specifically, her trial was extremely brief, a matter of minutes in front of the full Wizengamot, with no consideration of the influence of the dark mark on the oaths and compulsions it imposes." "You're saying I wasn't fully responsible," Bellatrix said, and her voice was flat and controlled and utterly devoid of the thing that word, responsible, might have been expected to produce. "Because of the mark." "I'm saying it was never tested," Dumbledore said carefully. "The question was never asked in a court of law. The evidence of imperious equivalent compulsion built into the mark itself was never presented, because Bartemius Crouch was running the Wizengamot trials and he wasn't interested in nuance," Bellatrix said. "He was interested in scalps." She turned the teacup in her hands. "I knew what I was doing," she said, very quietly. "The mark made it easier. Made it feel, correct, righteous, ordained. But I knew." She looked up at Dumbledore. "I want to be clear about that. I'm not asking for an acquittal on grounds of diminished responsibility. I'm telling you I knew." The room was very quiet. Harry looked at her. She was looking at Dumbledore and she was not flinching from what she'd said and she was not performing remorse, she was simply being accurate, which was, he was beginning to understand, fundamental to who she was. She could not be imprecise about herself even when imprecision would have been more comfortable. "I understand," Dumbledore said. "Nevertheless, there are grounds for appeal that were never utilized. The circumstances of your departure from Azkaban," he paused delicately. "My cell door opened," Bellatrix said. "The bond pulled it open. I walked out. The Ministry will need to understand that as a magical phenomenon rather than an escape attempt in the traditional sense. I believe I can make that argument." He looked at Harry. "With Harry's cooperation in confirming the bond's mechanics." "You have it," Harry said immediately. Bellatrix looked at him with that unguarded expression again, brief, quick, then gone. "In the interim," Dumbledore said, "the safest place for Bellatrix is Hogwarts. The castle's wards, combined with the bond's already demonstrated capacity to interact with them, create a situation where she is both contained enough to satisfy the Ministry's immediate concerns and protected enough to be," he paused, "safe from other interested parties." "Voldemort," Harry said. "Yes. He'll move on her," Harry said. "Once he knows she's out and here, he'll try to use her, or he'll try to eliminate her. He knows about the bond. Either she's leverage or she's a threat." He looked at Bellatrix. "You know how he thinks." She was looking at the teacup. Something in her posture had changed, stiffened slightly, the way a person stiffens when a name reaches them through layers of conditioning that years of Azkaban haven't entirely cleared. The mark, even faded, even stripped of most of its active power by years of its master's absence, was still there on her arm. Harry could feel it through the bond, a discordant note, a wrongness, something that wasn't hers, something that had been put there and that the bond periodically flinched away from. "He'll send someone," she said. "When he finds out I'm here, he'll send someone who can reach me. Someone I trusted." She paused. "Or he'll send me a message through the mark. Try to wake it. Try to remind me what I am." What were, Harry said. Her eyes came up. Sharp. The bond overrides the mark, Harry said. You told me yourself, it's architecture. It's structure. It was there first. The mark can't reach through that. He held her gaze. He knows that. That's why he needs to act fast, before you're settled here and the bond is fully active and he stopped. Beyond his reach, she finished. Yes. She looked at him for another long moment. Then she looked at Dumbledore. You have a plan, she said. You always have a plan. Tell me what it requires of me. Dumbledore looked at them both, the 40-year-old woman in an oversized Hogwarts robe and the 11-year-old boy who was looking at her with the kind of level, confident authority that people 3 times his age didn't always manage, and his expression was complicated in a way Harry had come to recognize. The expression of a man who has been playing chess and has just realized that a piece he thought was a pawn has been a different kind of piece all along. Rest, Dumbledore said. For now. The plan develops from here. He gestured at the clothes on the desk. There are rooms prepared. Eat. Sleep. You've earned that much, at least. Bellatrix stood. She picked up the clothes. She looked at Harry once more and said, with the dry precision that was apparently as natural to her as breathing, you still haven't told me how a 7-year-old from Little Whinging ended up in Grimmauld Place in 1977. Accidental magic, Harry said. Mostly. Mostly, she repeated, and the corner of her mouth moved, not a smile, not quite, but the intention of a smile, the ghost of what a smile might be in a face that had forgotten how to make one, and she left. The Aurors arrived 90 minutes later, 2 of them, official and slightly breathless and deeply unhappy about the situation. Harry sat in Dumbledore's office while Dumbledore handled them with the diplomatic efficiency of a man who has been managing institutional relationships for 60 years and has perfected the specific art of being absolutely cooperative while giving nothing away. The bond mechanics were explained. Harry confirmed the bond's existence and its role in the cell doors opening. The Aurors wrote things down. They didn't look pleased. The older one, stocky, gray-haired, a scar across his chin, kept looking at Harry with an expression Harry identified as a mix of professional wariness and personal curiosity. You're the Potter boy, he said, at one point, not quite as a question. Yes, Harry said. And you're telling me you have a magical bond with Bellatrix Lestrange. Bellatrix Black, Harry said. She took the Black name back when she came through the bond. At least in my head she did. He paused. Yes. The bond's real. You can check it, any competent magical assessment will confirm it. We'll be doing that assessment, the Auror said grimly. Good, Harry said. I want it confirmed officially. It'll make the appeal process easier. Both Aurors looked at him. Dumbledore made a subtle expression that was as close as he ever came to looking amused. The Aurors left without Bellatrix and with an armful of documentation that Dumbledore had prepared with the thoroughness of a man who had started preparing it approximately the moment he'd registered the bond's existence at Harry's sorting. Harry watched them go from the window, 2 dark robes crossing the Hogwarts grounds in the thin afternoon light, and felt the bond warm in his sternum, steady and settled and present. She was somewhere in the castle. Eating, he hoped, or sleeping, or both. The thread that connected them was clear and clean in a way it had never been when there was a North Sea and a prison between them, close, real, here. He could feel the exhaustion in it, the long-accumulated bone-deep exhaustion of years in a terrible place, but underneath that, warmth. Relief. The specific relief of a very cold person who has finally, after a long time, reached somewhere with heat. He pressed his hand to his sternum. The bond pulsed once, warm, steady. Then he went to find Ron and Hermione, because the next part of this required people he trusted and there were things to figure out quickly before Voldemort decided to stop being theoretical. Ron took it better than expected. Hermione asked 11 questions in 4 minutes, 9 of which were genuinely useful. Neville, who had been in the common room when Harry came back and who had clearly been watching Harry's face since October with the quiet attentiveness of someone who notices things and says nothing, looked up from his herbology essay and said, "She's here, isn't she? Bellatrix Lestrange." Everyone went still. Harry looked at Neville. Neville looked back with those large, careful eyes, and his quill was very still in his hand, and his expression was the expression of a person who has been carrying something enormous since before they were old enough to understand its weight. "Yes," Harry said. "She's here." Neville put the quill down very precisely, parallel to the edge of his parchment. "My parents," he said. "I know," Harry said. "I know about your parents." "What are you?" Neville paused. "Reorganized." "What does it mean that she's here?" Harry sat down across from him. The fire was going. Fred and George were at the other end of the room engaged in something involving a dung bomb and a lot of hushed argument, which meant they wouldn't hear this. He leaned his arms on the table. "It means she's out of Azkaban," Harry said. "It means she's here because the bond pulled her here, and I can't change that and I'm not trying to. It means she's going to be at Hogwarts for a while Dumbledore sorts out the legal situation." He held Neville's gaze. "And it means that whatever she did, and she did it, I know she did, she's here now and she's real and she's a person. Not just the story of what she did." Neville was quiet for a long moment. His hands on the table were still. He had his mother's eyes, Harry had seen photographs, and right now they had a quality of someone measuring something very carefully against an internal standard. "My mum gives me gum wrappers," Neville said. "When we visit. She doesn't know who I am. But she saves her gum wrappers and gives them to me because something in her still wants to give me something and that's all that's left." His voice was flat and controlled and the control cost him. "Bellatrix Black did that." "Yes," Harry said. "She did. So if you tell me she's a person and not just the story of what she did," Neville said, "you also have to tell me that the story of what she did is real. Not minimized. Not something I have to be big about." "I'm telling you both," Harry said. "Exactly that. Both true at once. The story is real. She's also a person." He paused. "I'm not asking you to forgive her. That's not something I get to ask. I'm asking you to trust that I'm handling something real and complicated and that I won't pretend to complicate it away to make it easier." Neville looked at him. The fire crackled. "Okay," Neville said finally. He picked up his quill. "Okay." Harry sat back. Ron let out a long careful breath. Hermione was writing in her notes with the focused energy of someone doing something useful because she needs something useful to do. The mark in Harry's sternum burned steady and warm. From somewhere in the castle, in a guest room that Dumbledore had arranged quietly and without announcement, a woman with dark curls and years of cold in her bones was, if there was any justice in the available universe, finally getting warm. She was in the corridor outside the Great Hall at breakfast the next morning. Harry saw her before most of the other students noticed her. He was coming down the stairs from Gryffindor Tower and she was standing at the corridor's end, clean now and wearing proper clothes, the wild hair somewhat restrained though not entirely tamed, and she was looking at the castle with the expression of someone seeing something they thought they'd lost the right to see again. She had her arms crossed and her chin up and she was looking at the vaulted ceiling of the corridor with the focused, private attention of someone taking inventory. He walked up beside her. "It's the same," she said, without looking at him. "You were here before," Harry said. "Graduated 1970. Her voice was neutral. "I was head girl." She said it without pride and without regret, just accurately, the way she said all facts. "I was very good at everything." Another pause. "I was also the most accomplished student in dark arts practice in the school's history, apparently, according to Professor Merithot, who told my father before he told me, which was typical." The last three words had an edge that came and went quickly. "I was top of every class," she said. "I worked harder than anyone else. I knew more. I could do more. She finally looked at him sideways. Do you know why? Because you could feel the magic, Harry said. Because it wanted to be used and you were the one who let it. She looked at him fully. Yes, she said. Exactly yes. I know how that feels, he said. I know you do, she said. I've been feeling your magic for 4 years. She paused. You lifted 17 feathers in charms. He looked at her. You saw that? Felt it. Through the bond. The corner of her mouth did that thing again, the intention of a smile. Show off. I learned from a 7-year-old who levitated 6 candlestick holders with an untrained wand, Harry said. The intention of the smile became the first real one he'd seen on her face, brief, sharp, and astonishingly genuine, here and gone in under 2 seconds, but real, actually real, in a face that had been through everything Azkaban could do to it, and Harry felt the bond pulse warm and the echo in his right hand and something in him that was profoundly satisfied that this specific face could still do that specific thing. Come get breakfast, he said. Ron and Hermione want to ask you things. Naturally, she said dryly. A bushy-haired girl and a red-headed boy. I've felt them through the bond too, you know. Anyone close to you shows up. She uncrossed her arms. What kind of things? Hermione has a list, Harry said. Of course she does, said Bellatrix Black, and walked with him toward the great hall like someone reclaiming territory they'd surrendered too early. Chapter 4, The War That Was Always Coming. The owl arrived on a Wednesday. Not a ministry owl, those came in grey and officious with red wax seals and the particular energy of documents that had been drafted by committee. This one was black, completely black, with eyes the color of old embers, and it landed on the Gryffindor table at breakfast between Harry's porridge and Hermione's toast and sat there radiating a specific quality of wrongness that made the students nearest to it lean away without quite knowing why. Harry looked at it. It looked at him. He took the letter. No name on the outside. Inside, the parchment was dark, not black but the specific dark of old expensive paper that had been stored somewhere lightless for a long time, and the writing was in green ink, in a hand so controlled it was almost architectural, each letter the exact size of the one before it, with no variation, no personality, just precision. Mr. Potter. You have something that belongs to me. I propose an exchange. Come to the forest's edge at midnight, alone, and we discuss terms. You are not yet powerful enough to refuse this meeting. She is not yet beyond my reach. Consider these facts carefully. No signature. It didn't need one. The table around Harry was doing its usual breakfast noise, cutlery on plates, overlapping conversations, someone at the far end laughing too loud. The black owl spread its wings and left without waiting for a reply, which was the specific arrogance of someone who doesn't consider your reply a variable. Harry folded the letter and put it in his pocket. Well? Ron said, from across the table, watching his face. Voldemort wants a meeting, Harry said. The cutlery noises from the nearby seats dropped noticeably. Ron's jaw tightened. Hermione's hand moved to her quill the way it always did when she needed something to hold. Neville, 3 seats down, became very still. He's here. Hermione said quietly. Near enough, Harry said. He thought about the letter's phrasing, forest's edge, midnight. He thought about not yet powerful enough to refuse. He thought about the specific kind of person who writes that sentence to an 11-year-old and means it as a fact rather than a threat. You're not going, Ron said, with the conviction of someone who has made a decision that is final. Of course I'm going, Harry said. Harry, Ron. Harry looked at him steadily. He thinks I'm not powerful enough to refuse. He's wrong. But more importantly, every minute I don't meet him is a minute he's deciding what to do about Bellatrix without any input from me. He picked up his spoon. I need to know what he knows and what he's planning. A meeting tells me that. Refusing the meeting tells me nothing and removes whatever leverage I currently have, which is limited but real. He ate a spoonful of porridge. I'll tell Dumbledore. And Bellatrix. Bellatrix, Ron repeated, with the specific tone of someone still calibrating a name they didn't expect to use this way. She knows how he moves, Harry said. She knows what the meeting is actually about and what the leverage is and what he's prepared to do to get it. That's information I need before midnight. He found Bellatrix in the room Dumbledore had given her, a guest room on the third floor that had been a storage room within living memory and still had the slightly apologetic energy of a space that wasn't quite sure of its own purpose. She'd rearranged the furniture. The desk had been moved to face the window. The bookshelves, empty when she'd arrived, had 3 days' worth of books on them, borrowed from the library in rapid succession, theory texts, magical history, a battered copy of Advanced Defensive Casting that she'd apparently checked out twice already. She was reading when he knocked and entered, sitting in the single chair with one knee drawn up and the book held at the precise angle of someone who reads the way other people breathe, not for pleasure or duty but because the alternative is suffocation. She looked up, registered his expression, and closed the book without marking her page, which meant she'd remember exactly where she was, which Harry filed away as a data point about the quality of her mind. He handed her the letter. She read it once, folded it with the controlled precision of someone who is managing what their hands do because the alternative is letting them do something else, and gave it back. "Midnight at the Forest's Edge," she said. Classic. He always preferred the theatrical. Her voice was neutral in the specific way of someone keeping something complicated from the surface. "He's testing your nerve. If you go, he learns how you move under pressure. If you don't go, he learns you're cautious, which he'll interpret as weakness." "Either way he learns something," Harry said. "Either way," she agreed. "The question is which thing you want him to learn." "That I'm not afraid of him," Harry said immediately. "That's not performance. It's true. I'm not. And I want him to know it's true because then every calculation he makes from this point has to account for someone who doesn't factor in the way he expects." She was looking at him with that focused intensity. "You're 11, she said, but this time it had a different texture than the times before, not incredulity, not the processing time response to kindness, but something closer to the tone of a person making a technical observation about a genuinely surprising piece of engineering. "He doesn't know that's a problem," Harry said. "That's the point." Her mouth moved. The intention of a smile. "What do you want from me? Tell me what he'll say. What he actually wants, not what the letter says he wants. What leverage he thinks he has and what he'll threaten if the conversation goes wrong." He paused. "And I want you there." Silence. The window behind her desk showed the Hogwarts grounds in early evening gray, the forbidden forest at the edge of visibility, the tree lean where the letter had told him to come. "At the meeting," she said. "Yes. Not visible. But there." He looked at her. "He thinks you're his. He's operating on the assumption that you're either going to be recovered by him or represent a threat that needs to be eliminated. He hasn't factored in the third option, which is that you're independently functional and you've chosen a side." He paused. "Have you?" The question sat in the air. It wasn't a test, he wasn't testing her, but it was real, and they both knew it was real, and she held it for a moment with the seriousness it deserved. "I chose in a dark hallway in 1977, she said quietly. "When I pressed a stone into your hand and told your magic to remember. I chose then, before I knew what it cost, before I knew what I was going to become. The choice got buried under everything that happened after." She looked at him steadily. "But it was there first. That's what the bond is. That's what Azkaban couldn't eat." A pause, short and final. "Yes. I've chosen." "Good," Harry said. "Then let's go deal with him." He went to Dumbledore's office at 7. Dumbledore was waiting, he was always waiting, which Harry had stopped finding eerie and started finding useful, because it meant the conversation could skip the setup, and Harry laid out the plan with the clean efficiency of someone who had thought it through from multiple angles and was presenting conclusions, not asking for permission. I'm going to the meeting, Harry said. Midnight. Forest's edge. Bellatrix will be nearby but not visible. I need to know what you know about his current location and what form he's in, because the letter suggests he's embodied enough to be present in person and that changes the tactical situation. Dumbledore looked at the letter. Looked at Harry. Made the gesture where his fingers touched his lips. He is, partially restored, he said carefully. Not fully. The unicorn blood has given him a kind of sustained existence, and he has a host. He paused. Quirrell. Harry had known. He'd known since October, since the direction of the flinching and the specific quality of the fear and the turban always facing the class. He nodded. Quirrell. The possession is symbiotic at this point rather than complete, Dumbledore said. Voldemort is present but dependent. Which means he is, more dangerous in some respects, because he has nothing to lose, and less dangerous in others, because he cannot act fully independently of Quirrell's physical limitations. He paused. Harry, I want to be very clear that I don't think this meeting is, I know you don't, Harry said. I'm going anyway. He said it without heat. Because it's the right move and because I can handle it and because I'm not going to spend my life waiting for you to tell me when things are safe enough to do. He met the blue eyes. I want your information, not your permission. Those are different things. Dumbledore was quiet for a long moment. Then, with the expression of a man who has encountered his own argument coming back at him from an unexpected direction, he said, the unicorn blood gives him temporary protection but it binds him to the creature it was taken from, which is dying. He needs the stone. He looked at Harry steadily. He's going to use this meeting to assess whether he can maneuver you into giving him access to it, or whether he needs to take another approach. He doesn't know where the stone is, Harry said. No. But he believes you might be led to it, that your protection instincts, your need to prevent harm, might be manipulated to bring you to it. He paused. He knows about the prophecy. Tell me the prophecy, Harry said. Another pause, longer. The spinning instruments on Dumbledore's table turned softly. The portraits on the walls dozed and occasionally didn't. The fire crackled. The one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord approaches, Dumbledore said quietly. Born to those who have thrice defied him, born as the seventh month dies. And the Dark Lord will mark him as his equal. But he will have power the Dark Lord knows not. Either must die at the hand of the other, for neither can live while the other survives. The fire crackled. Harry sat with the words. He felt them land and arrange themselves in the architecture of what he already knew, and he understood, immediately and completely, why Dumbledore had been managing information rather than sharing it, because these words, delivered without context, without preparation, were designed to reduce a person to their fear, to make the future a thing that happened to them rather than a thing they moved through with intent. Power he knows not, Harry said. The bond. Dumbledore's eyes showed something, surprise again, genuine, and then consideration. That is one interpretation. It's the right one, Harry said. The bond is the one thing he can't replicate. He doesn't love. He doesn't form connections. He certainly doesn't form soul bonds. Whatever the bond is and whatever it's capable of, it exists entirely outside his frame of reference. Harry stood. That's useful. Thank you. He left at 10 to midnight. The grounds were cold and very quiet under a sky that was more cloud than star, the moon behind cover, the torchlight from the castle at his back casting a long shadow ahead of him across the wet grass. Harry walked with his hands loose at his sides and the bond blazing warm in his sternum and his mind clear and organized in the way it got when things simplified down to action. At the forest's edge the trees started suddenly, the way they do in old forests. One step it was open ground and the next the canopy was over you, dense and dark and smelling of earth and old growth. Harry stopped at the tree line. He didn't have to wait long. Quirrell came out of the trees, and immediately it was clear that Quirrell was the wrong word for what was happening. Quirrell was present in a physical sense, yes, his body was there, his face was there, but the person behind the eyes was something else entirely. Something that looked out through Quirrell's eyes with the cold focus of a consciousness that has stripped away everything except intelligence and will and the absolute refusal to admit defeat. "Mr. Potter," said the voice that used Quirrell's mouth but didn't belong to it. Smooth. Very controlled. With the quality of a sound made by something that doesn't quite have a body anymore and is compensating for it by making its voice impeccable. "You wanted a meeting," Harry said. "Here I am." The thing that was Voldemort in Quirrell looked at him. Really looked, with the focused assessment of someone taking an actual inventory rather than performing threat. Harry stood in that look the way he stood in everything, steadily, without giving ground, without flinching. "You're smaller than I expected," the voice said. "And you're less than I expected," Harry said. "A man in someone else's body. That's a diminished state." The eyes didn't change. "You understand the prophecy. Dumbledore told me tonight." Harry watched the eyes. "You've known it longer." "Since before you were born," the voice said. "I have had 11 years to consider what it means and what it requires." A pause, deliberate. "You are not afraid of me." "No. You should be. Every person of intelligence and experience who has encountered me has been afraid." "Then the prophecy makes more sense now," Harry said. "If everyone who's met you has been afraid, then the power you know not is someone who isn't." He tilted his head. "What do you want?" The thing in Quirrell's eyes shifted. It was used to being the one who controlled the pace and direction of conversations. Harry could see the slight recalibration when someone else set the tempo. "The stone," it said. "You know where it is." "No, I don't," Harry said. "Dumbledore has it warded 7 ways inside the school. I haven't tried to find it and I have no plans to." "You could be motivated to find it." "By what?" The eyes flicked, a gesture Quirrell's body made that wasn't Quirrell's, toward the tree lean to Harry's right. "By her." Harry felt the bond shift. Bellatrix, positioned in the trees 15 feet to his right, her presence a warm distinct signature through the connection. She'd heard. She was utterly still. "You think she's leverage," Harry said. "She was mine for 20 years. The mark remains. Whatever this bond is, it doesn't erase 20 years of, she's been in Azkaban for a decade," Harry said. "Whatever she was to you, she paid for it in the worst place your side ever created." He looked at the thing in Quirrell's eyes without warmth and without heat, just clearly. "And the bond is older than the mark. I think you know that. I think that's actually why you want this meeting, not the stone, not leverage, but information. You want to know what the bond is and whether it actually overrides your mark and whether you've genuinely lost her." The silence was long and had quality, the quality of someone who has been precise in their dealings for 50 years and has just been precisely read by an 11-year-old. "You are remarkable," the voice said, and it was not a compliment in any warm sense but it was accurate in the way that a scientist is accurate about a specimen. "She made her choice," Harry said. "Years ago, before you ever got your hands on her. The bond was there first. You built on top of something that was already spoken for and now it's reclaiming what was always its." He let that settle. "You haven't lost a follower. You never really had what you thought you had, because the thing you thought you owned was already someone else's entirely. You speak of people as possessions," the voice said, and something in it shifted, colder, more precise, more dangerous in the way that things get dangerous when they stop pretending to be negotiating. "You're the one who marked her," Harry said. "I'm the one who's saying she belongs to herself." Another silence. Then the thing in Quirrell's eyes did something Harry hadn't anticipated, it laughed. Not Quirrell's laugh. Something older and more controlled, a single short exhalation of something that was as close as it could get to genuine amusement. "The power I know not," it said. "Is it this? This, refusal to be what the situation requires? This absolute certainty?" "Partly," Harry said. "What's the other part?" Harry pressed his right hand against his sternum, flat and deliberate, and felt the bond respond, felt it respond from both sides, his own warmth and from the trees to his right the specific fierce warmth of Bellatrix, and the combined thing was enormous and old and built from something the man in front of him genuinely couldn't replicate, and he let it build, let it come up through him, let it be visible in the way he stood and the quality of the air around him, the way it had been visible when 17 feathers rose in charms without effort, the way it had been visible when the locks of Azkaban opened without a wand. The air changed. Quirrell took a half-step back without appearing to decide to. "That's the other part," Harry said. The thing in Quirrell's eyes looked at him across the distance. Then it said, very quietly, very precisely, "This isn't over." "I know," Harry said. "But this conversation is." Bellatrix came out of the trees as Quirrell retreated into them, moving with the predatory grace of someone who has always moved that way and whom years in a cell have not entirely stripped of it. She stood beside Harry and they both watched Quirrell's retreating form disappear between the dark trees, and the forest was quiet, and the castle behind them threw warm light across the grounds. "You told him she belongs to herself," Bellatrix said. "You heard everything. Every word." She was looking at the tree line. "He'll send someone," she said. "Not Quirrell. Quirrell is his instrument but not his weapon, not for something like this. He has other pieces still in play. People who weren't caught, who've been quiet, who owe debts." She turned to look at Harry. "He's going to attack the castle." "When?" "Within the week. He needs the stone before the unicorn blood runs out, and you've just told him you're not a viable route to it, which means he comes himself." She paused. "Quirrell knows the castle. The wards, the layout, the weak points. He's been here all year studying them." "Then we tell Dumbledore tonight," Harry said. "And we start closing the weak points." She looked at him sidelong. "You just had a conversation with the most dangerous dark wizard in a century and your first instinct is logistics." "My first instinct was to go to the meeting," Harry said. "Logistics is my second instinct." The corner of her mouth moved. "What's your third?" "Figure out how to end this before it gets worse." He started walking back toward the castle. "Coming." She walked beside him. The wet grass was cold under the castle's reflected warmth, and the grounds were quiet, and above them the stars were beginning to come through the cloud cover, and she walked with her arms uncrossed and her chin up in the quality of someone reclaiming something, not just the castle grounds, not just the open air, but something larger, something that had been taken from her piece by piece for years and was now, step by step, being reclaimed. "The meeting went better than I expected," she said. "Did you expect me to die?" "I expected him to be more persuasive," she said. "He's usually more persuasive." "Because I wasn't afraid," Harry said. "Fear makes people open to persuasion. Take the fear away and all he has is threat, which doesn't work on someone who's already decided threat isn't a deciding factor." She was quiet for a moment. "I was afraid of him," she said. "For years, before Azkaban, I thought I wasn't. I thought what I felt was devotion, loyalty, that specific kind of certainty that comes with belonging to something larger than yourself. But it was fear underneath all of it. Fear of being nothing. Fear of being wrong. Fear that if I stepped away the darkness would follow me rather than the other way around." She said it flatly, precisely, without performing self-knowledge. "He found that fear when I was 17 and he never let go of it." Harry listened to this without interrupting. The castle steps were ahead of them now. "You were never nothing," he said. "Even at 7 you were the loudest thing I'd ever felt." She was quiet. "The fear was a lie he sold you," Harry said. "He's very good at selling lies because he's working with real material, real fears, real hungers. That's what makes him dangerous. Not the power. The accuracy." "Yes," she said, and the word was quiet and heavy with the weight of someone conceding a thing they've known for a long time. "Exactly, yes." They went inside. The attack came on Saturday. Not at midnight, not in dramatic darkness, It came at 3 in the afternoon with thin winter light coming through the castle windows and most of the students in the library or the common rooms or the grounds, and the first sign was the castle wards, which Dumbledore had upgraded on Thursday based on Harry's report and Bellatrix's tactical analysis, going from passive alert to active resistance with a sound like a very large bell struck once, resonant and final, that moved through the stones of the castle and into the bones of everyone inside it. Harry was in the corridor outside the library with Ron when it hit. He felt it through the bond first, Bellatrix, somewhere above him, 3rd floor, her magical signature flaring from its usual baseline state into something entirely different, something high and sharp and combat-ready, and through their connection he felt the particular quality of someone shifting from civilian to fighter like a lever being thrown. "Ward strike," Harry said. Ron already had his wand out. He'd been practicing since October with the focused dedication of someone who has decided that being next to Harry Potter is going to require him to be considerably more prepared than the average Hogwarts student, and it had showed in his spellwork, which had gone from competent to genuinely fast. "Where?" "7th floor," Harry said. "The corridor near the mirror." He'd mapped the castle in the first month, not deliberately but because walking its corridors and feeling its wards and understanding its spatial logic was interesting and that was enough. "That's where Quirrell's been. That's where the stone is." He started moving. "Get Hermione and Neville. Tell them corridor defense, 3rd floor junctions, keep the students moving down and away from the 7th floor." "And you?" Ron said. "I'm going up." "Harry, I need Bellatrix," Harry said. "She's already moving. Go." He went up. The 7th floor corridor was wrong immediately. The air had the quality of air in a space where significant magic had recently discharged, electric and slightly scorched, and the tapestry of Barnabas the Barmy was swinging on its hooks as though someone had run past it hard. 2 suits of armor had been knocked from their alcoves and lay in pieces on the floor, which meant something had come through with enough force to do that, which meant this was not a feint. Bellatrix came around the corridor's turn from the opposite direction, moving fast and fully operational in a way that Harry had understood theoretically but was now seeing as a physical reality for the first time. She moved through space like someone who has been doing this since before most people learned to read, wand in hand, eyes tracking every doorway and shadow and angle with the automated precision of a mind trained to combat mapping. She saw him. Didn't break stride. "He's inside," she said, falling into step beside him. "Quirrell went through the mirror 20 minutes ago. Dumbledore is, where?" "Not here." The Ministry called him, a false alert, obviously, something designed to pull him away before the attack. Classic misdirection. Her voice was clipped and fast. It worked because no one expected him to be the target of a tactical setup. "Who called it in?" "Someone with Ministry access and a reason to want Dumbledore absent." She stopped outside the mirror. It looked like a mirror, tall, ornate, the frame slightly wrong in the way that magical objects are slightly wrong in ways that take a moment to identify. The surface wasn't quite reflective. "He's through there. The stone is on the other side." "How do you know?" "Because I'm very good at this and I've been thinking about nothing else for 3 days. She looked at him. "I go through first." "We go together," Harry said. Harry, the name landed differently every time she used it. This time it had the specific texture of someone who is worried and expressing it as an argument rather than as the emotion it actually is. "Together," Harry said. "Because the bond is the variable he doesn't understand. Our magic combined is the thing he hasn't faced before. Separately we're powerful. Together we're," he reached for the word. "Something else." She looked at him. Looked at the mirror. "Together," she said. They went through. The chamber on the other side was circular and low-ceilinged and lit by torches that threw orange light across stone and the trapped glass smell of a room that hasn't had fresh air in months. Quirrell was at the far end, standing in front of a stone plinth, and he was not alone. The thing that used Quirrell's body had brought something else with it, some distilled concentrated piece of its own magic that hung in the air above the plinth like a shiver in the light, dark and specific and wrong in a way that made the bond in Harry's sternum contract instinctively. Voldemort and Quirrell turned to face them. The eyes, those cold, not Quirrell eyes, went to Bellatrix first. And what moved through them was not surprise but something more complicated, the expression of someone encountering a reality they had calculated as a possibility but not fully prepared for. He had known, intellectually, that the bond might reclaim her. Seeing her standing beside Harry, wand out, combat ready, the mark on her arm invisible under her sleeve but the bond's alternative blazing visibly in the quality of how she stood, there was a beat of recognition there, and in that beat something moved across the not Quirrell eyes that was as close as that face ever got to something human. Then it was gone. You brought her, the voice said. She came, Harry said. Different thing. Bella, the voice said, and it used the name with the specific practiced intimacy of someone who knows exactly how much weight that name carries in that form, who has used that weight for decades as a tool. You don't have to, don't, Bellatrix said. The single word was flat and clean and final. Don't use that name to me. You lost the right to that name. The thing in Quirrell's eyes assessed this. The bond didn't do this, she said. I did this. The bond reminded me who I was before you, and I made a choice. She raised her wand. Give me the stone. You can't cast at me, the voice said. The mark, even diminished, the compulsion structure remains. You'll find your magic, she cast. Fast, clean, a curse that Harry didn't recognize but that left a scorch mark a foot wide on the wall 6 inches from Quirrell's head, which meant she'd aimed it exactly where she intended, which was a demonstration rather than an attempt. The mark, apparently, was no longer the relevant variable. The thing in Quirrell's eyes understood immediately. The shiver in the air above the plinth moved, turned toward Harry, and the magic that came from it was like nothing Harry had encountered before, not a spell with a structure and a logic but something more fundamental, more stripped down, well-made direct force, concentrated and aimed and enormous. Harry met it. This was the thing he hadn't fully known about himself until this moment, in this chamber, with the bond blazing and Bellatrix beside him and the magic running through him like a river in flood. His power had been growing since October, fed by the bond, amplified by Bellatrix's enormous magic running through their connection, and it had grown past the point where a diminished Dark Lord in a borrowed body could simply overwhelm him. The force hit his magic and his magic did not yield. It absorbed, redirected, turned the force back on itself the way water turns a stone's corners, not by opposing but by being fundamentally more than whatever was pushing against it. Quirrell staggered. The voice said, very quietly, "Ah." "Yes," Harry said. "Ah." "The bond," the voice said. It was calculating still. Always calculating. "The bond," Harry confirmed. "The power you know not. It's not a weapon, it's a foundation. I'm standing on something you can't touch." He looked at Quirrell's eyes. "It's over. Give me the stone." "The stone is in my possession." "No," Harry said. "It's not." He looked at the plinth. The stone sat on the plinth in a shallow depression, red and small and densely magical, the specific density of an object that has centuries of craft folded into it. Harry looked at it and thought come here with the same relaxed certainty he'd thought rise at the feather in Charms, and the stone rose from the plinth, crossed the chamber in a clean arc, and settled in his right hand. The one with the echo in the bones. The one she'd pressed the stone into, years ago. He closed his fingers around it. The thing in Quirrell's eyes made a sound that was not speech. What happened next was fast and involuntary and entirely outside Harry's planning. Quirrell lunged forward, hand outstretched, and his hand connected with Harry's face in the specific way that Voldemort's hand through Quirrell had connected with Harry's skin before, and the contact was incandescent, white light, the bond blazing and Bellatrix's magic blazing with it through the connection, and Quirrell's skin where it touched Harry went wrong, burned, the specific burn of dark magic. Encountering something it was fundamentally incompatible with, Harry felt it as warmth, enormous and rushing, and Quirrell felt it as the opposite, and the thing in Quirrell's eyes felt it as the collision of two forces where one of them had been reinforced beyond what had been calculated and the other had not. Quirrell collapsed. The dark shiver in the air above where the plinth had been screamed, not a sound exactly but a vibration, a frequency that lived at the edge of audible, and scattered outward in every direction, darkness thinned to nothing, dispersed, gone. Not killed. Not yet. Harry knew it wasn't over, the prophecy was precise about ending, but diminished, expelled from the host, scattered without form or anchor, sent back into the in-between where it had lived after Godric's Hollow and where it would have to begin again from further back. The chamber was quiet. Harry opened his hand. The stone sat in his palm, warm. Bellatrix lowered her wand slowly. She was looking at the place where the dark shiver had been, and her expression was complex, the complexity of someone who has spent 20 years in proximity to a thing and has just seen it scattered, and feels something about that which is neither simple grief nor simple relief but some compound of both, layered with the specific weight of reckoning. "He'll come back," she said. "I know," Harry said. "Weaker than before. Much weaker. But he'll come back." "Yes." He closed his hand around the stone. "But we have time now. Real time. Months. Maybe longer." She turned to look at him. Her face had the particular quality of it after combat, not the wide-eyed adrenaline quality that some people got but the opposite, more focused, cleaner, all the non-essential things stripped away by the clarity of a situation that had required everything. "You're bleeding," she said. He touched his face. His hand came away red. Quirrell's nails, apparently, during the contact. He hadn't felt it. "I'm fine." "You're bleeding on a legendary magical artifact," she said. "The stone probably appreciates the drama." He looked at his hand. "Are you all right?" She looked at him. Then around the chamber. Then at the collapsed form of Quirrell, who was breathing shallowly, unconscious, absent his passenger, more himself than he'd been all year, and also probably going to need significant medical attention. Then back at Harry. "I used the mark to cast," she said. "Contrary to everything it's supposed to do. Everything it was designed to prevent." Her voice was carefully level. "That's the first time I've cast against his interests since I was 17 years old." She looked at her arm, at the sleeve covering the mark. It hurt. But it worked. "Because the bond was louder," Harry said. "Because the bond was louder," she agreed. She uncovered her arm. The mark was visible, dark, but different, something changed in its quality, a line through it that hadn't been there before, the specific look of an oath structure that has been breached and is beginning to unravel. "It's breaking down," she said quietly. "Good," Harry said. She looked at him with that expression, the one that was unguarded and real and complicated with years of things she didn't yet have clean language for. Then she said, very quietly, very precisely, "You realize that when Dumbledore gets back he's going to be insufferable about the fact that you did this without him." Harry almost laughed. Did laugh, a short real one that echoed off the stone walls. "I'll manage." "I know you will," she said. "That's not in question." He looked at her, this woman who was standing in a stone chamber with combat in her recent past and Azkaban in her longer past and something new and still forming in her present, and the bond between them was warm and steady and completely itself, not pulling toward or away from anything, just present, both of them in the same room finally instead of across a distance, and it felt like the chord from the dark hallway in 1977, two instruments finding the same note and the combined sound being richer than either alone. "Come on," Harry said. "Let's go tell Dumbledore he missed it." She made a sound that was definitively a laugh, brief and sharp and completely unguarded, here and gone, and followed him out. Chapter 5 Everything that was left in the dark. The ministry came on Monday. Not Aurors this time, those had come and gone with varying degrees of confusion and paperwork, but a full delegation of 5, in formal robes with the ministry seal prominent on each lapel in the specific way that formal robes carried formal seals, which was the magical bureaucracy's equivalent of a raised voice. They arrived at 9 in the morning and were installed in Dumbledore's office, and Dumbledore met them with the specific warm immovability of a man who has dealt with institutional pressure for 60 years and has long since learned to make it feel like hospitality. Harry was not invited. He went anyway. He knocked, walked in, sat in the third chair without waiting to be offered it, and looked at the 5 ministry officials with the composed certainty of someone who belongs where he's standing. The officials looked back at him with varying degrees of surprise and the specific discomfort of people who have prepared for a meeting that is now not quite the meeting they prepared for. The one in the center, senior, silver-haired, with the expression of someone perpetually calibrating the political weight of everything in their immediate environment, was a man Harry didn't recognize but whom Dumbledore introduced as Barnabas Cuff, Senior Under-Secretary to the Minister for Magic. "Mr. Potter," Cuff said. "This meeting concerns Bellatrix Black and the bond," Harry said. "I know. She's not here because this conversation goes better without her in it initially, not because she doesn't have standing. She has full standing. I'll bring her in when we need her." He looked at Cuff. "What does the ministry want?" Cuff looked at Dumbledore. Dumbledore looked at Cuff with benign, absolute neutrality. "The ministry's position," Cuff said, with the measured pace of someone consulting an internal script, "is that Bellatrix Lestrange, Black," Harry said. A pause. "Bellatrix, Black, remains a convicted criminal who departed Azkaban without authorization. Regardless of the circumstances cited regarding a magical bond, the legal fact of her conviction and her sentence, her trial was 6 minutes long," Harry said. "I read the transcript. 6 minutes, no defense counsel, no submission of evidence regarding the Mark's compulsion structures, no examination of diminished responsibility. In front of a Wisengamot that Bartemius Crouch was running in a state of what any reasonable assessment would describe as punitive panic." He looked at Cuff. "That's not a trial. That's a performance of consequences. Any appeal on those grounds has better than reasonable prospects, and I think you know that, which is why you're here in person rather than sending a letter." Another pause. One of the other officials, younger, a woman with quick dark eyes who was taking notes, had stopped writing and was looking at Harry with something that was either assessment or alarm. "You've done considerable research," Cuff said. "I do considerable research about everything that affects me," Harry said. "The bond makes this my concern legally as well as personally. I've had that confirmed." Dumbledore, who had been sitting with his fingers pressed together in the gesture of a man watching a performance he is enjoying, said mildly, "Perhaps we might discuss the specific grounds for appeal that Healer Marchbank's assessment of the bond mechanics would support, in a moment," Harry said. He looked at Cuff. "First I want to know what the ministry's actual concern is. Not the official position. The actual concern. Because you sent 5 people and the senior undersecretary for a matter that a letter could have handled if the official position was simply she broke out of prison. So what is it?" Cuff looked at him for a long moment. The calculation behind his eyes was visible in the way that professional political calculations become visible when they're running on something they didn't prepare for. Then he said, "The dark mark. What about it?" "If the bond has genuinely overridden the Mark's compulsion structures," Cuff said carefully, "then we need to understand the mechanism. Because if it can be done once, if a pre-existing magical bond of sufficient age and power can override a dark mark, then the implications for our understanding of the other marked individuals are significant," Harry said. "Significant," Cuff agreed. "There are currently 17 people serving sentences in Azkaban who were convicted in part on the basis of Mark-compelled actions. If the Mark constitutes a form of magical coercion, if it operates analogously to an imperious curse, then the legal and ethical implications are enormous," Harry said. "Yes." The room was quiet. The spinning instruments on Dumbledore's table turned. A portrait cleared its throat softly and then stopped. Harry looked at Cuff. "That's a legitimate concern," he said. "And it's a good reason to get the appeal done properly, with full examination of the mark's mechanics, so that the legal framework is established correctly and every subsequent case can be evaluated against an actual precedent rather than the current void. He paused. That's what you want. Not to send her back. You want the legal groundwork. We want certainty, Cuff said. The ministry does not, the current minister does not want to be seen as, releasing a Death Eater, Harry said. I understand the optics. But the alternative is maintaining a conviction you know is legally compromised, which is a worse long-term position. He leaned forward. Set the appeal. Get the Weisengamot examination of the mark's compulsion structures. Let the evidence speak. Whatever the outcome, it's clean, you've followed the process, you've done it correctly, and you have precedent for the 17 others. He paused. And while you're doing that, she stays here under the castle's wards, which are rather more robust than Azkaban's as it turns out. Cuff looked at Dumbledore. Dumbledore looked at Harry. The note-taking official was writing again, quickly. How old are you? Cuff said. 11, Harry said. The appeal? The officials left at noon with an agreement to initiate formal appeal proceedings within 30 days and a document Dumbledore had prepared which had clearly been waiting in his desk drawer for exactly this meeting. Harry sat in the chair for a moment after they'd gone, in the quiet of the office with the portraits murmuring and the instruments turning. You prepared that document weeks ago, Harry said. I prepared several documents, Dumbledore said. I find it useful to have options. You could have told me the ministry was coming. You would have prepared, Dumbledore said. As it was, you walked in unprepared and managed it rather better than I could have orchestrated. Harry looked at him. That's not a justification for not telling me. No, Dumbledore said. It's not. He met Harry's eyes. I am learning, Harry. To share rather than manage. I am not always succeeding. He paused. But I am learning. Harry sat with this. It was honest. It was insufficient and it was honest simultaneously, which was the territory Dumbledore occupied, a man of genuine intelligence and genuine care and a genuine, deeply embedded habit of managing the people around him for outcomes he'd already decided were correct, and the habit was wearing down against the reality of Harry, who kept being correct on his own and kept making the habit visible. There's something else, Dumbledore said. Tell me. Dumbledore stood and crossed to the window. He looked out at the grounds, the same grounds Harry had walked across in the rain with Bellatrix 3 days ago, with his hands clasped behind his back and his white hair catching the light. The bond's origin, he said. I told you in October that I didn't know it. That you'd provided new information with the 1977 incident. He paused. That was true. But since then I have investigated. And I have found something I should share with you. Harry waited. The bond is not accidental, Dumbledore said. Not in its deepest sense. I believe you understood this intuitively from the beginning. But the full history is, he turned from the window. Sit comfortably. This is not a short story. The story began, Dumbledore said, in the 15th century, with a Potter and a Black who were not enemies. The family animosity you might expect between a Potter and a Black is largely a product of the last 2 centuries, Dumbledore said. Before that, in the time of Linfred of Stinchcombe and Sirius Black I, in the period before blood purity politics calcified into the form we know, the families had a different relationship. They were allies. More than allies. He paused. There was a treaty. Not a political treaty. A magical one. The kind made by people who understood that the deepest and most durable agreements were the ones written not in ink but in magic, in the actual living substance of what they were, in the portion of themselves that persisted beyond bodies and politics and changing times. The agreement, Dumbledore said, was made between a Potter who was the foremost magical theorist of his age and a Black who was the most powerful practitioner of her generation. They were colleagues, partners in research, and they shared a conviction that the growing division between magical families, the beginning of what would eventually become the blood purity movement, would, if unchecked, destroy magical Britain from within. They had made a pact. Not a simple oath, those could be broken, had been broken, were being broken all around them in that period as alliances shifted and politics hardened. They had made something structural. Something architectural. They bound their family lines, Dumbledore said. In a working of magic that neither of them fully understood and that no one since has been able to fully replicate. They created a mechanism, dormant across generations, requiring specific conditions of magical compatibility to activate, that would, when the time was right, create a bond between a Potter and a Black of sufficient power and complementary nature to, he paused. To correct the trajectory. To serve as a counterweight to whatever the worst version of the blood division had become by the time the bond activated. Harry sat with this. The bond was designed, he said. The conditions were designed, Dumbledore said carefully. The specific individuals, you and Bellatrix, were not chosen by anyone. The mechanism simply waited across centuries for two people whose magical profiles were compatible enough, whose natures were complementary enough, and whose, he chose the word carefully, whose purposes were aligned in the right direction. And when it found them, it pulled me back in time to meet her, Harry said. When we were both 7. Before the choices that divided us were made. Before she was 17 and Voldemort found her fear and used it, Dumbledore said quietly. Yes. The mechanism was anticipatory. It found the right moment to plant the connection, the moment before the divergence. The fire crackled. Harry looked at his right hand. So when she pressed the stone into my hand, he said slowly. When she made the bond anchor, she was doing what the mechanism intended. But she didn't know that. She did it because her magic wanted to. Because it felt right. Because she was 7 years old and extraordinarily powerful and her magic recognized yours and reached for it in the purest possible way, Dumbledore said. The mechanism created the conditions. But the bond was hers and yours. The choice was real. The choice was always real, Harry said. Not to Dumbledore exactly. More to the fact of it. Yes, Dumbledore said. The mechanism cannot make choices for people. It can only make the connection available. What both of you did with it, she, holding onto it through Azkaban, you, following it with the research and the meeting and everything that's followed, those were choices. He paused. And the mechanism cannot guarantee outcomes. It created the bond. What the bond does, what it enables, what it ultimately achieves, that depends on the people it connects. Harry stood. He walked to the window and stood where Dumbledore had been standing, looking out at the grounds. You knew about the treaty, he said. Before October. Before the sorting. I suspected, Dumbledore said. The bond's registration in the castle wards when you arrived confirmed it. The specific frequency, it matched records I had from a very old text, a history of the Black family that predated the current family's, shall we say selective approach to their own history. He paused. I should have told you sooner. I was assessing how much weight you could carry. You were managing information, Harry said. Yes. Harry turned from the window. If you do it again, withhold something about me, or about the bond, or about what I need to know to handle what's in front of me, I will find out. I always find out. And the conversation that follows will be less comfortable than this one. Dumbledore looked at him. Something in the blue eyes was genuine and unguarded and had a quality Harry hadn't seen there before, the quality of a person who has been told a true thing and is actually receiving it rather than filing it for later management. I understand, Dumbledore said. Harry, I am not your enemy. I know, Harry said. But you're not always my ally either. Sometimes you're your own project, and I'm a piece of it. He moved toward the door. I need to tell Bellatrix about the treaty. She deserves to know where the bond comes from. She may find it difficult, Dumbledore said. The knowledge that the connection was in some sense built. She'll find it interesting, Harry said. She's not the kind of person who wants things to be simple. He found her in the library. Of course he did, she was always in the library now, working through texts with the systematic hunger of someone who has been starved of information for a decade and is making up lost ground with methodical intensity. She had 3 books open and parchment covered in notes that were written in a hand so small and precise it was nearly print, and she didn't look up when he sat down but said, without raising her eyes from the page, "You've been to see Dumbledore." "He told me about the treaty," Harry said. The quill stopped. "The 15th century compact," Harry said. "Between a Potter and a Black. The mechanism they built into their family lines." She put the quill down. Looked at the open book in front of her rather than at him. He watched her process it, the slight tension in her jaw, the controlled quality of her breathing, the very specific stillness of someone running a significant piece of new information against a structure of existing knowledge and feeling it land. "The bond was designed," she said. "The conditions were. Not us specifically. A mechanism that waited for the right 2 people." Her voice was neutral. "The right moment. Before the divergence," Harry said. "When we were both 7. Before your path went the direction it went." Another silence. She turned one page of the open book without reading it. "And you trust this information?" "Dumbledore's sources are good," Harry said. "And it fits everything we already know, why the bond is structured the way it is, why it's old enough to override the mark, why the first contact happened before we could have chosen it. The pieces fit. Everything was planned," she said. "We were placed. We were given a connection," Harry said. "What we did with it wasn't planned. You held on to it in Azkaban when no one could have made you. I went looking for it when I could have chosen not to." He watched her face. "The mechanism didn't put us in this room. We are." She was quiet for a moment that stretched. Then, "I've been reading Black family history," she said, with a gesture at the open books. "Since I got here. Trying to understand, the family, the lineage, what it was supposed to be versus what it became." She turned one of the books to show him a page, a genealogy, dense with names and dates going back 8 centuries, the Black family tree in its original form before the selective editing and the family member burning. "There's a gap," she said. "Around the 15th century. Names that were removed. A whole branch of the family that the current tree pretends doesn't exist." She pointed to a place in the genealogy. "Because they made alliances the later Blacks considered unacceptable. Alliances with Potters," Harry said. "Among others." She closed the book. "I read it 3 days ago and I didn't know what it meant. Now I do." She looked at him. "The family I grew up in would have burned this information. They would have pulled it from the records the way they burned names from the tapestry. They built their entire identity on the principle that blood purity was the defining value, that separation from certain families was the meaning of what it meant to be a Black." She paused. "And underneath all of that, encoded in the actual magic of the bloodline, was a mechanism designed to undo that separation. A Potter and a Black, bound together by the oldest magic in either family, designed to correct the worst version of what the blood division had become. Your ancestors put it there because they could see where things were going," Harry said. "And they disagreed with the direction." "My ancestors disagreed with my family," she said, and the phrase had layers, historical, personal, immediate. "The people I was raised to venerate were building on top of something that was actively designed to resist them." She made a sound that was almost a laugh, dry and sharp. That's genuinely funny in a deeply unpleasant way. The magic in your bloodline was always pointing somewhere different from where your family was taking you," Harry said. "You felt it. At 7, you felt it, and it reached for me before you had any context for what reaching meant." She looked at him across the table. The afternoon light from the library windows was long and golden and it fell across the books between them and across her face and across the hand that was resting on the closed genealogy book, and she was quiet with the quality of someone who is sitting with something large and is not trying to rush the sitting. "It doesn't resolve anything," she said finally. Knowing this. The Longbottoms are still in St. Mungo's. What I did is still, real. History doesn't become less itself because you understand the forces that shaped it. No, Harry said. It doesn't. I'm not looking for a way to reframe it into something cleaner, she said. I want to be clear about that. I'm not. She looked at her hands. But knowing that there was something in me that was always oriented differently. That the magic itself was oriented differently, and I spent 20 years pointing it in the wrong direction. She paused. That matters. Not as an excuse. As information. About what I might have been, if things had gone differently. Or what you might be, Harry said. Going forward. She looked at him. The mechanism made a bond, Harry said. The bond is a direction. Where you go in that direction is yours. She was quiet for a moment. The library was quiet around them, afternoon light, the smell of old books, somewhere in the stacks Madame Pants moving slowly among the shelves. Ordinary. Peaceful. The specific peace of a place that is built around the activity of knowing things, which was perhaps the most natural environment for a person like Bellatrix Black, who had always, even when she was using that intelligence in the worst direction, been fundamentally oriented toward understanding. The appeal, she said. The ministry meeting this morning. 30 days to formal proceedings. Dumbledore has the paperwork. The mark's mechanics will be examined properly. He paused. Whatever the outcome, it'll be real. Not 6 minutes and no defense. An actual process. And you argued for this, she said. Someone had to. Dumbledore could have. Dumbledore was preparing to manage the conversation, Harry said. I had the conversation instead. It went faster. The corner of her mouth moved. The intention of the smile. 11 years old, she said, but it was softer than the other times, stripped of the incredulity, left with something closer to the tone of a person saying something that continues to astonish them in a way that is not unwelcome. Almost 12, Harry said. She made a sound that was absolutely a laugh, brief and real, and then looked down at her books with the expression of someone trying to recover composure that hadn't been lost so much as briefly loaned. She pulled her notes toward her. I want to read the full text of the treaty, she said. If it exists in a recoverable form. I'll ask Dumbledore. I want to read the original working, she said. The actual magical record, not a historical description of it. The mechanism itself, whatever form it was documented in. She looked at him. If I'm going to understand what I am and what I'm part of, I want to understand it from the source. I'll get it, Harry said. You're very confident about what you can get, she said. I asked Dumbledore for everything he knew about the bond at 11 years old and he gave it to me, Harry said. I think I can get a 15th century magical document. She returned to her notes. Then, without looking up, there's something else. Harry waited. The mark, she said. It's been unraveling since the chamber. Since I cast against him. The structure is, decomposing, I think is the right word. Every day there's less of it. She said this with the flat precision of a technical observation. But the decomposition isn't clean. There's residue. Dark magic that was embedded for 20 years doesn't simply evaporate. It leaves traces in the magical core, in the pathways it occupied. She paused. I need someone qualified to help me address that. Someone who understands both the mark's construction and the bond's current architecture. Because the two systems are occupying overlapping space, and as the mark degrades, the bond is expanding into the space it leaves. Is that, Harry started. It's fine, she said, quickly. It's not harmful. But she paused again, and this was the longest pause she'd taken, and her quill was still, and something in the quality of her stillness communicated that this was the peace she'd been working toward. The bond expanding into the space the mark leaves it changes things. The connection. The quality of it. It becomes, she chose her words with the precision of someone who cannot afford to be imprecise. More immediate. I feel you more clearly. Not intrusively. But you're more present in my awareness. And I assume the same is true for you. It was. He'd noticed it over the last 3 days, the bond richer, more detailed, less like a compass and more like a, he'd thought about it the way a canal is more than a river, engineered to be present in specific ways. It is, he said. Another pause. I wanted you to know, she said. Before it progressed further. Because it feels, it should be something you're aware of and have considered. Whether you want it to continue. Harry looked at her. She was looking at her notes, quill poised, and she was doing the thing where the surface was all precision and control and the raw thing underneath was not quite hidden, barely hidden, in fact, a fact of her that she was getting less able to conceal the more the mark came apart and the bond settled into the space it left. Bellatrix, he said. She looked up. I pulled Azkaban open, he said. My magic pulled your cell door off its hinges because the bond wanted you here. I went to a midnight meeting with Voldemort and took him apart. I've been fighting for the appeal since the day you arrived. He looked at her. Do you genuinely not know where I stand? She held his gaze. The raw thing was fully present now, and it had the same compound quality as always, complicated and real and layered with years of things she was still finding language for, and underneath all of it, very clearly, the thing she'd felt in a dark hallway in 1977 when she was 7 and her magic reached for his and the world said yes. I know where you stand, she said quietly. Then let the bond expand, he said. We figure it out as it goes. She looked at him for another moment. Then she nodded once, short and final, the gesture of someone closing a decision, and returned to her books. Harry sat across the table in the afternoon light and felt the bond warm and present and growing, filling the spaces where dark things had been with something older and more fundamental, and thought about his ancestors and hers and the 15th century conversation they'd been having across a gap of time and blood and politics and wrong turns and terrible choices, and thought that some conversations take a very long time to reach their conclusion. He found Ron and Hermione in the common room that evening, which had the specific evening energy of a space where work had been done and was being set aside and the fire was going and it felt like the right time for honesty. The bond was designed, he said, sitting on the floor in front of the fire because all the chairs were taken. Not us specifically. But the conditions that created it. 15th century magical pact between our family lines. He looked at them. A Potter and a Black built a mechanism to create a corrective bond when things got bad enough. Ron processed this with the expression of someone finding, to their own surprise, that this made things clearer rather than stranger. So it was always going to happen. The connection was always possible, Harry said. What we've done with it was always ours. Hermione, who had her quill out and was writing, said without looking up, Does Bellatrix know? I told her this afternoon. How did she take it? Like herself, Harry said. Took it apart, looked at every piece, named what it meant and what it didn't mean, and then filed it accurately. He paused. She wants the original working document. The actual magical record of the pact. I'll start looking, Hermione said immediately, as Harry had known she would. She also told me the mark is decomposing and the bond is expanding into the space it leaves, Harry said. Which changes the connection. Makes it more present. Ron was quiet. Then, how much more present? I feel her more clearly. She feels me more clearly. He looked at the fire. It's not intrusive. It's more like, he thought about the chord from 1977, the two instruments finding the same note. Like hearing the other half of a harmony you've been playing alone. Ron was quiet for another moment. Then he said, with the careful gentleness that was one of his best qualities, is that all right? Do you want it to be, she's, She's a lot. She is, Harry said. She's also, I mean, she's been through, and Ron made a gesture that was trying to encompass the entirety of Bellatrix Black's history, situation, and personality simultaneously, which was a lot to ask of a hand gesture. I know, Harry said. And you're 11. Almost 12. Harry. Ron. Harry looked at him. I know what it is and what it isn't. It's a bond. It's old and real and mine and hers. What it becomes as we get older, I'm not projecting that. I'm just present with it. That's all. He looked at the fire. She's the most interesting person I've ever met, and she has more magic than anyone I've ever felt, and she's been through things that would have destroyed most people, and she's still here, thinking precisely about everything, holding her ground. He paused. That's what I know about it right now. The rest develops as it develops. Ron was quiet for a moment. Then, fair enough. He stretched out his long legs toward the fire. You know, she beat Hermione to borrowing advanced defensive casting from the library. I know, Harry said. Hermione didn't take it well. I know, Harry said. She'll take it as a challenge. She already has, Hermione said from the chair above them, still writing. I've put in a request for the second copy from the restricted section. They sat in front of the fire, the three of them, and the common room murmured around them, and Harry felt the bond warm and present and real, and somewhere across the castle in a room that was learning to be hers, a woman with dark curls and a dissolving mark in centuries of family history that had just taken a new shape was reading, and the bond between them was richer than it had ever been, filling the spaces the darkness left with something patient and gold and deeply, structurally old. Neville found Harry alone near the greenhouses the next morning, which Harry had the impression was not entirely accidental. Neville rarely did things accidentally, despite his reputation, and his capacity for quiet deliberate action was one of the things Harry had noted about him since September. Can I ask you something? Neville said. Yes, Harry said. About her. He didn't say the name. He didn't need to. Yes, Harry said again. Neville was quiet for a moment. He had his hands in his pockets and he was looking at the greenhouse glass, and his expression was the one he wore when something cost him and he was paying the cost anyway. Does she, he stopped. Reorganized. Does she know what it meant? What she did? Not the fact of it. Not, I know she knows the fact. But does she know what it's like? What my parents are like, when I visit? Harry thought about what Bellatrix had said in the grounds after the midnight meeting. I knew what I was doing. I'm not asking for an acquittal on grounds of diminished responsibility. He thought about the flat, precise honesty of it, the refusal to be imprecise about herself even when imprecision would have been easier. I think you should ask her, Harry said. Neville looked at him. Not because it's easy, Harry said. But because she won't lie to you and she won't minimize it and she won't give you a performance of remorse designed to make herself feel better. She'll tell you exactly what she knows and what she doesn't. He paused. And I think you need exactly that more than you need anything softer. Neville looked at the greenhouse glass for a long moment. Then he nodded once. Okay, he said. Yeah. Okay. He walked back toward the castle. Harry watched him go, and thought about the 15th century conversation that ended here, in a Scottish castle in 1992, with an 11-year-old boy carrying the weight of his parents' silence and a woman carrying the weight of having put it there, and the bond between a Potter and a Black that had been designed precisely for the worst version of this moment. He thought, it doesn't fix it. But it can be present for it. He pressed his hand to his sternum and the bond pulsed warm. He went inside. Chapter 6, The Magic That Chose. Otherwise summer came to Hogwarts the way it always did, gradually and then completely, the way any change of state happens, the castle shedding its winter grey in increments until one morning you walked out onto the grounds and the light was different and the air was warm and the whole place felt like something that had been holding its breath for 6 months had finally let it go. Harry stood on the front steps at 7 in the morning and felt it and thought, 1 year. 1 year since a cupboard in Little Whinging, since Gerald the spider and the August heat and the floor dropping and a dark hallway and a girl with wild curls and a circle of floating brass. 1 year since everything started moving toward this. The appeal hearing was in 4 days. The preparation had taken most of May. Hermione had found the original working document, or rather, she'd found a copy of it, fragmentary and old and written in a form of Latin that required 3 translation dictionaries and Dumbledore's personal assistance, in the archive room behind the restricted section, in a box that had the specific look of a box that had been there for centuries and had been waiting for someone with the right combination of persistence and research instinct to find it. She'd brought it to Harry at 11 at night, slightly breathless, and he'd read it in 40 minutes and then taken it directly to Bellatrix, and Bellatrix had read it in 20, and the two of them had sat in the library after midnight with the translated fragments spread across the table and gone through it piece by piece. The original working was extraordinary. Not just in its content but in its craft. Whoever the Black and the Potter had been, they had understood magic at a level that made even Dumbledore's professed knowledge look like the surface of something very deep. The pact was documented not as a treaty but as a proof, a mathematical demonstration, almost, of why 2 magical lines of this specific character would inevitably produce, under the right conditions, a bond of the kind they were encoding. It was less a spell than an argument, and the argument was so elegant and so complete that reading it felt like reading the theorem that every other magical theory had been trying to approach. Bellatrix had read it with the expression of a person encountering something they wished they'd had access to 20 years ago. She'd said nothing for a long time after she finished. Then she'd said, they were right. The mechanism was right. Everything about the design is right. She'd paused. Which means the divergence, the 3 centuries where the family went the wrong way, the divergence was wrong. Not in a moral sense. In a mathematical sense. It violated the logical structure of what the magic was trying to do. Your family spent 3 centuries arguing with a theorem, Harry said. And losing, she said. Slowly. The way you lose an argument with mathematics, not in a single defeat but in the accumulated weight of everything that doesn't add up. She looked at the documents. This is evidence, she said. For the appeal. Not just the bond's existence. The bond's purpose and origin and the specific history of the mark's relationship to it. She looked at him. This is the argument that was never made in 6 minutes in front of Bartemius Crouch. We use it, Harry said. We use it, she agreed. They'd spent 3 weeks building the case with the systematic thoroughness of 2 people who are both, fundamentally, oriented toward understanding things completely before they act. Hermione had organized the legal framework and the Wisengamot procedures. Harry had handled the ministry conversations. Bellatrix had done what she did best, taken the magic apart at its constituent level and documented exactly what the mark had been, how it operated, what it had done to her magical core, and precisely how the bond had overridden it. The documentation was 30 pages of the most precise magical analysis Harry had ever read, written in that small, near-print handwriting, and Dumbledore had read it and been quiet for a long time and then said, very carefully, that it was the most complete technical examination of the dark mark's compulsion mechanisms that had ever been produced. Because I'm the only person who had both the technical knowledge and the direct experience, Bellatrix had said flatly, when Harry told her this. I spent 20 years with the mark and I have a memory that doesn't lose details. If anyone was going to document it properly it was always going to be me. Dumbledore is impressed, Harry said. Dumbledore is always impressed by things he didn't think of first, she said, without heat, just accurately. He'll get over it. The case for the appeal was strong. Harry knew it was strong. But strength of argument had never been the only variable in legal proceedings that had significant political weight, and he was under no illusions about the fact that walking into the Wisengamot with the case they had was going to require managing a room full of people whose default position was that any modification of a conviction, especially this conviction, especially this name, was politically dangerous. He spent the morning before the hearing walking the grounds with Ron, which was his standard preparation method for anything significant, move through space, talk through things, let the forward motion work on the thinking. What's the weakest point? Ron asked. The Longbottoms, Harry said, without hesitation. Not as evidence, the marked documentation addresses the legal responsibility question well. But as the moment in the room where the Wisengamot stops thinking about law and starts thinking about reaction. He paused. Neville's coming. Ron looked at him. You asked him? He asked me. He said he had something to say. Harry looked out at the lake, which was catching the morning light in the way it did on clear days, flat and silver. I think it's the most important thing in the hearing. Ron was quiet for a moment. He spoke to her, he said. Last week. I saw them in the corridor. I didn't say anything. I know, Harry said. She came and found me after. She didn't say what was said. She just came to find me. He pressed his hand to his sternum briefly. The bond, he thought about the quality of what he'd felt, the specific emotional texture that had come through the connection. She was carrying something very heavy. And it wasn't guilt exactly. It was more like being seen accurately. Having the full weight of something acknowledged by the person who had the most right to weigh it. He paused. I think it mattered. To her or to Neville? Both, I think, Harry said. But maybe in different ways. They walked along the lake path in the early morning quiet, and the water turned slowly, and somewhere above them an owl cut across the blue sky, and Harry thought about the year that was ending and the year that was beginning, the one with a trial at the center of it and a full summer afterward and then second year at Hogwarts and all of it yet to happen, and felt the bond warm and steady in his sternum and felt, clearly, that it was good. Not simple. Not clean. But good in the way that things are good when they're made of real material. You know what gets me, Ron said, after a while. What? You met her when you were 7. Before any of this. Before she went to Azkaban, before Voldemort, before everything. You just met her in a hallway and your magic said that one and that was it. He looked at the lake. The universe is extremely committed to the bit. Harry laughed. A real one. Gerald the Spider would agree, he said. Ron looked at him. Who? Never mind, Harry said. Let's go get breakfast. The Wisengamot met in a chamber that was designed, architecturally, to be intimidating, high circular walls, tiered seating that placed the bench above the floor in a way that required the person being assessed to look upward, stone and old wood and the accumulated gravity of centuries of significant decisions made in this room. Harry had read about it. Being in it was different from reading about it, the room had presence, the kind that required acknowledging. He acknowledged it and then moved past it, because acknowledging something and being controlled by it were different operations. The bench was full. 37 members of the Wisengamot in purple robes with the silver W at the collar, with the chief warlock at the center, an elderly witch named Griselda Marchbanks who had the specific quality of the very old and very competent, no wasted motion, no performed authority, just the thing itself. Harry had researched her. She was precise and fair and had a low tolerance for spectacle that was actually useful today. Dumbledore was seated to one side of the chamber as the presenting advocate, which was a role Harry had argued for specifically because Dumbledore in that role was Dumbledore at his best, presenting evidence with the authority of someone whose knowledge was beyond dispute, without the management instinct that complicated his other roles. Harry sat beside Bellatrix at the respondent's bench. She was composed. Completely, deliberately, architecturally composed, every line of her posture and expression managed with the precision of someone who has decided exactly how they're going to be present in this room and has made that decision well in advance. She was in dark robes, not the grey of Azkaban, not the elaborate formal robes of her old family, something in between, professional and clean. Her hair was controlled. Her hands were still on the table. Through the bond Harry felt the immense effort of the composure. She was not afraid exactly, Bellatrix did not do simple fear the way other people did, but she was carrying a weight that was the accumulated weight of knowing that the next 3 hours would determine the shape of the rest of her life, and that the people in the tiered seats above her had the authority to give her back the remainder of what Azkaban had taken, or to take the rest. He pressed his knee briefly against hers under the table. She didn't move. But the bond registered it, warm, immediate, the pressure returned not physically but through the connection, a brief clear pulse of acknowledgement. She was ready. The first hour was documentation. Dumbledore presented the bond's existence, its history, the original working document from the 15th century, and the magical assessment of the bond's relationship to the dark mark's compulsion structures. He did this with the precise, unhurried authority of someone giving a lecture to the most important audience of his life and treating it the same way he'd treat a first-year class, complete, patient, without condescension. The Wizengamot listened. Marchbanks asked questions. They were good questions, the questions of someone who was genuinely trying to understand the mechanism rather than find the gaps in it, and Dumbledore answered them with the quality of someone who had prepared for exactly these questions, which he had. Then the senior orar who had been assigned to the prosecution, a woman named Amelia Bones, sharp-featured and sharp-minded, with the quality of someone who was committed to accuracy over outcome, presented the case for the conviction's validity. She did it well. She was honest about the trial's shortcomings while arguing that the fundamental facts remained: the crime had occurred, the defendant had participated, the victims existed. The argument, Bones said, is not that Bellatrix Black did not participate in the attack on Frank and Alice Longbottom. It is that the degree of legal responsibility cannot be properly assessed without understanding the mark's influence, and that this understanding was not available, or was not sought, at the time of the original trial. She paused. The Ministry's position has evolved in acknowledgement of this. We are not seeking to maintain the original sentence. We are seeking a sentence that reflects the corrected factual record. Harry noted this with something that was satisfaction but not surprise. The Ministry's political calculation had come around to the cleaner position, as he predicted, because the cleaner position was also the defensible one. Then Marchbanks said, "We will hear from the defendant." Bellatrix stood. She stood with the composure intact and spoke in the flat, precise voice that was her natural register, and she made no attempt to perform anything, no remorse that wasn't real, no apology designed for the room rather than for the person it should belong to. She said, "I knew what I was doing. The mark made it feel necessary and righteous and inevitable, but I knew. I will not ask this court to grant me the absence of responsibility on grounds I don't believe in." The chamber was absolutely quiet. "What I can tell this court," she said, "is what the mark is and how it operates. Not from theory. From 20 years of direct experience and a decade of the comparative clarity that came from the bond overriding it. The mark is not ownership. It is not simply an oath or a brand. It is an architectural modification of the magical core that creates compulsive loyalty structures analogous to, but more deeply embedded than, the Imperius Curse. It does not erase choice. It makes certain choices feel like not choices. It makes loyalty feel like identity. The difference is real and it matters legally." She paused. "I cannot undo what I did. I can tell this court exactly what it was, with more precision than anyone else alive, because I am in the specific position of having had both the experience and the eventual clarity to assess it accurately. And I can tell this court that the 6-minute trial that put me in Azkaban did not have access to this information and did not seek it." She looked at Marchbanks. "That's what I have." She sat down. The chamber murmured. Marchbanks let it murmur for exactly the right amount of time and then called for silence with the efficiency of someone who has been controlling rooms for 50 years. "We will hear," Marchbanks said, "from any additional parties who have registered to speak." Neville stood up from the gallery. He was 12 years old and he walked down from the gallery seating with the specific quality of someone doing the hardest thing they've ever chosen to do and having chosen it fully. He stood at the speaking position in the center of the chamber floor and he looked at the tiered seating and then he looked at Bellatrix. She met his eyes. "My name is Neville Longbottom," he said. "Frank and Alice Longbottom are my parents." His voice was steady. "They've been at St. Mungo's Hospital for 10 years. My mum gives me gum wrappers when I visit because she doesn't know who I am but something in her still wants to give me something. My dad sometimes looks at me like he's trying to remember a word. He paused. I grew up knowing what happened to them. I grew up knowing who did it. Bellatrix Lestrange was not an abstract fact to me. She was the specific person who took my parents away from me before I was old enough to know them. The chamber was silent in the way of a room that is not breathing. I'm not here to ask for her release, Neville said. I'm not here to forgive her. I don't know if I can do that, and I'm not going to say I can to make this easier. He paused. I'm here because she came to find me last week. She didn't have to do that. She could have let this hearing happen without, she could have let it go. She found me in a corridor and she sat down and she told me exactly what happened. Not a version of it designed to be easier for her to tell. The version that was accurate. She told me what she did and what it was, and she didn't ask me for anything afterward. His jaw was tight and his eyes were steady, and he was 12 years old and carrying something that a 12-year-old should never have had to carry, and the chamber could see that, and it was real. She said, I know this doesn't help. I know there's nothing I can say that helps. But you deserve to have someone tell you the truth about it directly, and I'm the one who can do that. He stopped. She was right. It didn't help. But it was something. It was more than I had before. He looked at Marchbanks. I'm not saying what you should decide. I'm saying that the person who sat in that corridor and told me the truth without asking me for anything is not the same thing as the sentence she was given in 6 minutes. He went back to his seat. The chamber was quiet for a long time. Marchbanks called a deliberation recess. Harry sat at the respondent's bench and felt the bond, Bellatrix beside him, the composure still in place, the weight of Neville's words sitting in the connection between them as a particular texture, heavy and real and not resolved into anything simple. You found him, Harry said quietly. Yes, she said. You didn't tell me you were going to. No. She was looking at the chamber wall. I didn't want it to be observed. Before. She paused. I needed to do it because it needed doing. Not as part of a strategy. Not as part of the hearing preparation. Because he deserved to have someone tell him the truth directly, and I was the only one who could. Her voice was very controlled. He's very brave, she said. That boy. Quiet about it. The kind of brave that doesn't need anyone watching. I know, Harry said. I've thought so since September. She was quiet. Then, he looked like her, she said. His mother. Around the eyes. Harry said nothing. There was nothing to say to that that would have been adequate. The bond held the weight of it between them, steady. Marchbanks came back in 40 minutes, which was fast. Harry took this as a signal before the verdict was announced. 40 minutes meant the deliberation hadn't been contentious, which meant the outcome had coalesced quickly, which meant the case had done what it was supposed to do. In the matter of Bellatrix Black, Marchbanks said, and used the name Harry had insisted on in every document and every communication and every meeting since March, the Wisengamot finds as follows. She looked at the bench with the clear, unperforming directness of a person who has made a decision they believe in. The original conviction is vacated on grounds of procedural inadequacy and the failure to examine material evidence regarding the nature of the dark mark's compulsion structures. A new determination of culpability, taking into account the full evidentiary record now available, finds Bellatrix Black guilty of participation in the attack on Frank and Alice Longbottom, with the mitigating factor of sustained dark mark compulsion assessed as significant but not exculpatory. She paused. Sentence. Time served. 10 years in Azkaban, assessed as proportionate to the mitigated culpability, constitutes the fulfillment of the judicial obligation. She set down her parchment. Bellatrix Black is released from any remaining custodial obligation of the state. This matter is closed. The chamber noise went up immediately, complex, multidirectional, not celebration and not condemnation, but the specific noise of a room processing a significant decision that will have implications they are all immediately beginning to calculate. Harry heard it and registered it and then looked at Bellatrix. She was looking at the chamber wall. Her hands were still on the table. Her expression was composed and would remain composed for exactly as long as she chose for it to be, which would be until she was somewhere that wasn't here, and he knew that, and he understood it completely. "Let's go," he said. They walked out of the chamber into the ministry corridor and then to the atrium and then outside into London summer, June light and warm air and the specific sensory intensity of being outside after hours in a stone room, and Harry felt the bond sing with the quality of something settling finally into its right configuration, warm and free and open. Bellatrix stopped on the pavement outside the ministry's Whitehall entrance. She tilted her face up slightly. The sun was warm. Around them London went about its enormous ordinary business, people walking, taxis, the distant sound of the city, and she stood in the middle of it with her face up and her eyes closed and the composure doing something it hadn't done since March, which was softening, just slightly, at the edges. Harry stood beside her and let her have it. After a moment she said, eyes still closed, time served. Yes. 10 years in Azkaban assessed as proportionate. Yes. I want to note, she said, that 10 years in Azkaban is in no sense proportionate to anything. No, Harry said. It isn't. She opened her eyes. Looked at the London street. But it's done, she said. It's done. She looked at him. The expression that lived underneath the composure, the one he'd named as raw and real and complicated with years of things she was finding language for, was fully present, and she didn't move it away, and the city went around them and the bond between them was warm as the June light. What happens now, she said. It was not quite a question and not quite a statement, exactly as her voice always was, the tone of someone who considers both receiving and providing information simultaneously. You're free, Harry said. That's what happens now. And the bond. And the bond, he agreed. Still there. Still ours. Growing as it grows. He looked at her. You have time to figure out what you want to do with the rest of your life. That's not a small thing. No, she said. It isn't. There's the war still coming, Harry said, because he would not pretend that away. Voldemort's scattered but not gone. He'll rebuild. The prophecy is still in effect. That's real and it's going to require everything, probably, before it's done. He paused. But it doesn't have to be done today. Today it's done for now. She looked at him with the expression he'd first identified at 7 years old, when the magic had blazed between them in the dark hallway and she'd been just a girl and the feeling had been too big for the words she had, but she had more words now, and he had more words now, and they were both people with enough history to understand the weight of what was being said. I made you a bond anchor stone, she said, when I was 7 years old without knowing what it was or what it would cost, and it took everything I had and then kept taking, and somewhere in all of that it turned out to be the only real thing. She paused. That's a remarkable return on a 7-year-old's investment. It really is, Harry said. The corner of her mouth moved. Don't be smug about it. I'm not smug, he said. I'm satisfied. She made the sound that was absolutely a laugh, brief and real and here and gone, and the city went on around them, warm and large and ordinary, and the bond between them settled into its permanent configuration with the quiet solidity of something that has finally completed its journey and arrived exactly where it was always going. They took the long way back to Hogwarts, because there was no reason to hurry and several reasons not to. The train rather than apparition, through London and then north through the countryside, and Harry sat across from her in the compartment with the English summer going past the window in long green sheets and felt the year accumulate behind him and the years ahead like open territory. Ron and Hermione were 2 seats down. Ron was asleep with his head against the window, which was his default response to trains. Hermione was reading a book that she'd appropriately sourced from the Hogwarts library before leaving, which was the kind of forward planning that Harry found deeply admirable. Neville sat at the far end of the carriage, looking out the window, and Harry watched him for a moment, the set of his shoulders, the quality of his stillness, and thought, he's okay. He's carrying something he'll carry for the rest of his life and he's okay with that, which is a different thing from being fine, but it's a real thing, and it's his. Bellatrix was reading too. She'd acquired a book from somewhere, Harry hadn't seen where or when, because she moved through logistics with the efficiency of someone who has always been good at making environments work, and she was reading with the one knee drawn up posture that was apparently her standard reading configuration. The same posture she'd had at 7. Some things persisted across everything. "You're looking at me," she said, without looking up. "I'm looking at the countryside," Harry said. "The countryside is to your left. I'm to your right." "Multidirectional awareness," Harry said. She turned a page. "You're also doing the thing with your hand," she said. "The sternum thing. You do it when you're thinking about the bond." He was, in fact, doing it, right hand flat against his chest, old habit from the first year when the mark had been new and he'd been learning its geography. He left it there. "You do it too," he said. "The mark's sight on your arm. When the bond is, when it's particularly active. You touch it. But differently than you used to." She was quiet for a moment. "The mark's almost gone," she said. "Another month, maybe. The bond's consumed most of the structure. What's left is, quiet." She turned another page. "It used to hurt," she said. "Even in Azkaban, faded as it was. A cold thing. Like a splinter you'd stopped noticing but that still registered as wrong when something knocked against it." She paused. "Now there's just the bond where it was. Warm." She turned another page. "It's better." "Good," Harry said. Outside, the countryside was giving way to something more northern, the hills getting bigger, the sky getting wider, the quality of the light doing that thing it does as you move north where it becomes more actual somehow, more present. He watched it happen and felt it happen in the bond too, the approach toward Hogwarts, the castle getting more specific in the resonance as they got closer, and through the bond Bellatrix's awareness of it, the castle that had been hers, years ago, before everything, that was becoming hers again in a different way. "What do you want to do?" Harry asked. "After the summer. Going forward." She considered this with the seriousness she gave to everything worth considering. "There are things I know that nobody else knows," she said. "The mark's mechanics. The full taxonomy of dark compulsion magic. 20 years of practical knowledge that could be documented properly. In ways that would actually help people." She paused. "There are people still in Azkaban who went through the same thing I went through. Whose trials were the same 6-minute catastrophes. If the framework from today's hearing becomes precedent, it will," Harry said. "Then someone needs to be the expert witness," she said. "Someone who can stand in front of the Wisengamot and say, this is what the mark is and this is what it does and here is the technical evidence that changes how these cases should be assessed." She turned another page. "That's something I can do better than anyone else alive." She paused. "I also want to teach." Harry looked at her. Not children," she said, with a slight expression that suggested the concept of teaching 11-year-olds was something she was still adjusting to as a daily reality. "Advanced practitioners. People who want to understand magic at its actual level rather than the pedagogical approximation of it." She paused. "Dumbledore has already suggested it, which I find simultaneously predictable and irritating." "He's usually right about the suggestions," Harry said. "Even when the timing is irritating." She turned another page. Then, without looking up, "And you?" "Me," he said. "What you want," she said. "Going forward." He looked out the window. Hills and sky and the late afternoon light going golden across everything. He thought about what he wanted in the way he had always thought about it, not as a wish or a fantasy but as a set of actual specific things that were possible and that he was going to work toward with everything he had. "I want the war over," he said. "Properly. Not just Voldemort scattered but the conditions he exploits, The fear and the blood politics and the way people get separated from each other by ideology until they're willing to do terrible things in its name. That takes longer than one fight. He paused. I want Hogwarts to be what it's supposed to be, a place where the actual education is as good as it should be, which right now it isn't uniformly. He glanced at her. I want the best defense teacher Hogwarts has had in 30 years. She turned a page. That's a somewhat transparent segue. I'm not known for subtlety, Harry said. You are, in fact, known for considerable subtlety, she said. You're doing the thing where you present a direct statement as though it's unsubtle specifically because it makes the direct statement easier to receive. She looked at him over the top of her book. It's a technique. You've been doing it since you were 7. You remember things very precisely, Harry said. I remember everything precisely, she said. It's occasionally inconvenient. She returned to her book. But the bond between them was warm with something that had a quality of humor in it, the specific warmth of two people who know each other well enough to read each other's techniques and have mutually decided to let the technique stand because the honest thing underneath them is true regardless. I want this, Harry said, simply. What we're doing. The bond and what it enables. This specific, he thought about how to say it. This specific way that your magic and mine work together. The chord. The harmonic. I want to know what that's capable of. I want to find out. She was quiet for a moment. Not the considering quiet. The receiving quiet. The quiet of someone who has been handed something real and is acknowledging its weight. We'll find out, she said. The castle was gold in the evening light when the carriages came up the long road from the station, the towers catching the low sun and throwing it back in warm shades of amber and ochre, and Hogwarts looked the way it always looked at the end of a journey toward it, enormous and old and deeply, stubbornly itself, the kind of place that has been accumulating meaning for centuries and wears it easily. Harry looked at it from the carriage window and felt the bond sing with the frequency of approach, and beside him Bellatrix was also looking, and between them the air had the warm charge of two active magical signatures that had spent a year learning each other's frequency and had arrived, finally, at the thing the original working had been building toward, not just a connection but a resonance, genuine and mutual and chosen on both sides, by two people who had each, separately and together, looked at what the bond offered and said yes, this, here. The carriage stopped at the front steps. They got out. The grounds were quiet in the long summer evening, gold and green and full of birdsong, and Hogwarts stood above them with all its centuries and all its stories and all its accumulated magic, and Harry stood on the stone steps of the place that had been the first home he'd chosen and felt the year settle around him and the years ahead open forward. Bellatrix stood beside him, looking up at the castle with the expression she'd had in the corridor in March, the expression of someone seeing something they'd thought they'd lost the right to. But it was different now. Not tentative. Settled. The expression of someone who has been through the process of earning back a right and knows they've completed it. There's a second-year orientation meeting tomorrow morning, Harry said. McGonagall mentioned it. I'm aware, she said dryly. Dumbledore mentioned it 3 times. He's making sure you feel included. He's making sure I don't set anything on fire, she said. Harry laughed. Real, full, unguarded, the kind of laugh that comes from genuine amusement with someone you know well enough to find funny. She made the sound that was her laugh, brief and sharp and absolutely real, and the bond between them was warm with it, and the summer evening was warm, and the castle was warm, and Gerald the Spider was probably still somewhere in a cupboard in Little Whinging doing his excellent architectural work, and the world was large and real and full of things that hadn't been figured out yet. Come on, Harry said. Let's go inside. She walked up the steps beside him and the door opened, the old castle recognizing them both, the wards that had bent to let her through in March now simply opening, no bending required, because she was part of the frequency now, registered as belonging, and they went in. The entrance hall was warm and lamplit and full of the sound of students returning from the station below, the accumulated noise of 200 people carrying their summers back into the castle, and Harry stood in the middle of it and felt the bond, warm, full, present, running between them like a current through two conductors that had finally been properly connected, and thought about a dark hallway and a circle of brass candlestick holders rising in the air between two 7-year-olds. While the magic said yes and here and this is the thing that was always supposed to happen. He thought about 15 centuries of a conversation that had been trying to say one thing, that the walls between people are never as permanent as they're built to appear, that the magic underneath the ideology is older and smarter and more patient than the people wielding it, that sometimes the most radical act available is simply to refuse to let anyone be written off entirely, to insist on the complicated real truth of a person against the convenient simple story of what they've done. He thought, we're the correction. Not perfect. Not finished. But real. Beside him, Bellatrix Black stood in the entrance hall of Hogwarts in the warm lamplight and looked around with her chin up and her expression clear, and the bond ran warm between them, and the magic that had chosen otherwise, that had reached across time and darkness and wrong turns and terrible choices and the coldest place on earth to say here and you and remember, was present and alive and completely itself. Unbreakable. Chosen. True. Somewhere in the ancient record of a working made in the 15th century by a potter and a black who understood that the worst version of the future was not inevitable, the last line of the proof read, and so it will be that when the divergence has run its full and terrible course, the bond will find its resolution not in the elimination of difference but in the choosing of it, two magics, separate and distinct, each greater for the other's presence, making something neither could make alone. This is the theorem. This is the correction. This is what the magic, given time enough, always chooses. The magic chose. It had always been going to.